Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host. The Yamin of Revolution, the fall of the U.S. Empire. Trump is in hiding, and he's been hiding, and he's been panicking. But before we get into that, y'all be sure to wipe y'all feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. We're the hardest working man in the news. Business is back with some late breaking news y'all can use. Let's get right to the content. Salute.
The fact is that Trump doesn't really listen to anyone else. Trump is a genius in his estimation, and he thinks that he knows what's best. So he has set up this system inside the White House where he does have some advisors, but they're basically people who live in fear of him. And if they tell him something he doesn't like, he's free to ignore them. With regard to Congress, Congress has remarkably little power in the foreign policy realm. So President Trump is pretty much free to do whatever he wants. And this is how we got into this war in the beginning. You want to remember that almost all of his principal advisors were opposed to the war. This includes the head of the CIA, General Kane, who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the vice president, and the secretary of state. They all thought that going to war against Iran in the fashion that we planned to do on February 28th was foolish. And of course, they proved right. But Trump refused to listen to them, paid hardly any attention, and instead listened to Benjamin Netanyahu and David Barnea, who is the head of Mossad. But this is just the way things work in the United States at this point in time.
Today, we are witnessing what can only be described as a catastrophic unraveling of American and Zionist ambitions against the Islamic Republic of Iran. The hype, the bluster, the threats, they have all collapsed under the weight of reality. And at the center of this implosion stands Professor John Mearsheimer, the renowned University of Chicago political scientist, who has delivered a verdict that the Pentagon and the White House desperately do not want to hear, but can no longer ignore. The United States has already lost this war. Not might lose, has lost. And while the neoconservatives and their allies in the occupation regime try to spin this as a strategic pause, the evidence on the ground tells a story of utter humiliation. Let's set the scene with the most recent developments because the sheer speed of these events is staggering. Just today, August the 10th, Iran's supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, who has been largely out of the public eye for months while directing the war effort, signed off on a sweeping military reshuffle, formally appointing 6 senior military commanders. This isn't just routine bureaucratic housekeeping. This is a consolidation of wartime leadership that has been operating in the shadows since the opening strikes of this brutal war back on February 28th. Strikes that killed Iran's previous armed forces chief of staff, Abdolrahim Mousavi, IRGC commander Mohammad Pakpour, and defense minister Aziz Nasirzadeh. The new appointments are telling. Ali Abdullahi, who has been coordinating Iran's joint wartime operations as head of the Khatam al-Anbiya Central Headquarters, has now been officially named Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces. Ahmad Vahidi has been confirmed as Commander-in-Chief, promoted to Major General. Former Army Ground Forces Commander Kiomars Haydari steps in as Abdullahi's deputy. Rear Admiral Ali Azmaei takes command of the naval forces after the killing of his predecessor in July. And perhaps most significantly, Hossein Taib, a name that sends shivers down the spines of those who understand Iran's internal security apparatus, has been appointed commander of the Basij paramilitary force. This is the return of a heavyweight, a man who spent more than a decade heading the intelligence organization and remains deeply embedded in the security establishment. What does this tell us? It tells us that Tehran is not retreating. It is not negotiating from weakness. It is doubling down, streamlining its command structure, and signaling to the world that it is ready for whatever comes next. And you can bet your bottom dollar that the occupation forces and their American backers are watching this with cold sweat dripping down their spines. Before I go any further, if you are finding this analysis valuable and you want to see more honest journalism that cuts through the propaganda, please do me a favor. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear the truth. And drop a comment below, even if it's just a dot, because every single engagement helps this channel beat the algorithm and reach more people. Subscribe to support independent, honest journalism that refuses to bow to empire. Now, let's get back to the story. And the humiliation doesn't stop at the Pentagon's war fatigue. The occupation regime is in absolute disarray. The Mossad, the vaunted intelligence agency that has been trying to destabilize Iran for decades, is in crisis mode. Reports have emerged that Mossad chief Roman Goffman has sacked two of his most senior officials, the head of the intelligence directorate and the head of the Iran division, over a failed plan to topple Iran's government. But here is where the story takes an even more fascinating turn, because we need to look beyond the battlefield and understand the geo-economic chess game that is being played beneath the surface. For decades, Iran warned that a major war would put the Strait of Hormuz at risk. Through this narrow waterway passes roughly 1/5 of the world's oil. It is the jugular of the global energy system. But here's the question that the mainstream media refuses to ask. What if this crisis in the Strait was never an unintended consequence of the war? What if it was the opening move in a much larger plan to reshape the entire energy map of the region? Think about it. The longer the Strait remains unstable, the easier it becomes to sell alternatives. And what is the alternative on the table? It's called IMEC, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. This is a planned trade corridor that would link India to Europe through the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and, crucially, the occupation entity. It would bypass the Strait of Hormuz entirely, offering a stable, overland route for trade and energy transmission that surgically excludes Iran.
On supporting the war in Ukraine. And of course, Fox News fits the same description. So Murdoch has a huge influence in that regard. We all know that Trump loves to watch Fox News and that he gets lots of his information from Fox News. So I'm sure that's helped him to think that there is a way to win this war. Although I would imagine at this point in time that President Trump has come to recognize that there's no way he can win this war. And that's why I like to argue that he's flailing around. It's the way it works in the United States. I don't know what else to say. We know that even before President Trump took office, that Congress had remarkably little power in terms of controlling the executive branch. It was true when Joe Biden was president. And then along comes Trump, and Trump has a Republican majority in the Senate and the House. And those Republican senators and Congress people are beholden to him, and they're scared stiff, except for a few exceptions, to challenge him. So he could pretty much do anything he wants without having to worry about Congress challenging him. And in terms of the media does complain here and there, but the media is actually remarkably hawkish when it comes to American foreign policy. And I think until things went south in Iran, the media, the mainstream media that is, was generally supportive of what Trump was doing. Trump was not taking a lot of heat from the mainstream media. So there are really no institutions in the United States except for alternative media platforms that challenge him. And those alternative media platforms are important because they have played a key role in shifting public opinion against President Trump on a number of key foreign policy issues. But that opposition from inside the public doesn't matter much either because Trump just disregards it. There is at the very least going to be a great reduction in the U.S. military presence in the Gulf. I mean, as you know, what's been happening here is that the United States has been moving assets out of the Gulf region to Jordan. And now there's evidence, given that the Iranians are attacking U.S. military sites inside of Jordan, that we're moving assets to Israel and back to Europe. The fact is that these Iranian ballistic missiles are deadly effective against American military bases in the region. And they have either badly damaged or destroyed almost all of them. And it's hard to imagine how once this war ends, number one, the United States is willing to rebuild these bases and put the assets, the American assets, back in the region. And number two, it's hard to believe that the Gulf states themselves are going to want those assets on their territory. Because in effect, what happens is those Gulf states become a giant magnet for these deadly effective Iranian ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones, which, by the way, will only become a more formidable threat with the passage of time, because the Iranians have figured out exactly what they have here. And there are not good ways for the Americans or the Gulf states to defend against those missiles and drones. So I think moving forward, there is no question there's going to be at least a great reduction of American military assets in the Gulf region. I didn't think he'd get very far with it, simply because the Ukrainians have no interest in widening the war. The Ukrainians are on the verge of losing their war against Russia. They're suffering enormously on the battlefield and in the air war. And it would be crazy for them to start a war with a country like Iran in the Middle East. And furthermore, from Iran's point of view, the last thing Iran wants to do is get into a fight with Ukraine. It makes more sense, much more sense for Iran to concentrate on winning the war in the Gulf against the United States and Israel. So neither side, and here I'm talking about the Iranians and the Ukrainians, had any interest in escalating. And of course, what happened is that the Ukrainians apologized to the Iranians, and the Iranians called off their planned counterattack. The Iranians had planned to hit 3 sites inside of Ukraine, and they called off that attack because Zelensky apologized. Well, I think there are 2 dimensions to the Ukrainian drone capability. One is how those drones affect events on the battlefield. And I think the Ukrainian drones, have been Ukraine's great savior on the battlefield. I believe that this war would have ended a year or 2 if the Ukrainians didn't have drones, because the Ukrainians have a significant shortage of manpower, a significant shortage of artillery. And in a war that was heavily dependent on just manpower and artillery, I think the Ukrainians would have collapsed a while ago. But the drones have really helped keep them in the fight in an important way. So that's one dimension to the drone issue. Then there's the whole question of using drones in long-range attacks into Mother Russia. And this, of course, is what the Ukrainians have been doing big time in recent months. And I don't think that those attacks have had any meaningful attack on the course of the war. And of course, as you were alluding to, if anything, it speeded up the end of the war, because there is good reason to think that the Russian response to these long-range drone attacks by the Ukrainians is that the Russians have decided to retaliate by attacking Odessa and other Ukrainian sites on the Black Sea. And this has had a devastating effect on Ukraine, because so much of Ukraine's agricultural product, as well as its industrial product, moves out of Ukraine via the Black Sea ports. And of course, the most prominent one is Odessa. But what's happened here, and it's very important to emphasize this, is that the Russians have basically closed the Odessa ports. And the end result is that today, Ukraine is effectively a landlocked country. And given the percentage of exports, Ukrainian exports that go out of those ports through the Black Sea, this is going to have devastating effects on the Ukrainian economy. So if anything, the long-range drone attacks on the part of the Ukrainians against Mother Russia are backfiring. Yeah, I don't understand why people in the West are enamored with this idea that you can punish the civilian population in a country, and that will cause the civilian population to rise up and overthrow the government or get the government to surrender to U.S. demands. This is what many people believe. All we have to do is really slam Russia with sanctions or get the Ukrainians to hit their population centers or bomb Iran, and the end result is instant victory. In fact, the exact opposite happens. What you get is a rally around the flag effect. There's hardly any evidence in the historical record that inflicting serious punishment on a civilian population in an adversary in wartime leads that adversary to surrender or leads the population to rise up and overthrow the government. And then the new government surrenders. This just doesn't happen. But for some reason, we have this belief in the West that this is the way the world works. And by the way, if you think about it, this was the thinking that informed President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu's decision to enter the war against Iran on February 28th. We were going to launch a shock and awe campaign against Iran. What we were going to do is decapitate the regime and inflict massive punishment in a short period of time on Iran itself. And supposedly that was going to lead to regime change. It was a cockamamie idea. And by the way, it's not at all surprising that Trump's advisors understood that it was a cockamamie idea. But Trump himself, for some reason, and Netanyahu, of course, believed this.
This is not conspiracy theory. This is cold, calculated strategy. The IMEC project would provide a trade route that bypasses the Strait of Hormuz, offering an alternative for global trade and energy transmission. It would strengthen the occupation regime's regional standing and deepen Arab normalization with Tel Aviv. And it would deal a devastating blow to Iran's economy, cutting off its ability to use the strait as a strategic bargaining chip. The occupation prime minister has publicly framed a post-war solution around rerouting Gulf oil and gas through the occupation entity to bypass Hormuz. The message could not be clearer. This war was never just about Iran's nuclear program or its regional influence. It was about breaking Iran's chokehold on global energy flows and transferring that control to Tel Aviv. But here's the beautiful irony that the warmongers in Washington and Tel Aviv failed to anticipate. Iran is not a passive victim of this geoeconomic warfare. It has been playing the long game. And while the United States and the occupation forces were busy trying to sell IMEC as the solution to the Hormuz crisis, Iran has been strengthening its own alternatives. The International North-South Transport Corridor, which links India to Russia through Iran, is emerging as the true future of Eurasian trade. Tehran is not just defending itself militarily, it is building its own economic architecture, one that bypasses the West's efforts to isolate it. The occupation regime may want to rewrite the region's energy map, but Iran is writing its own chapter in that story, and it is not a story of defeat.
Well, Turkey's not just any normal NATO country. It's not physically located in Central Europe or in Western Europe or even in Eastern Europe. It's in a very important way located in the Middle East as well as in Southern Europe. And the Turks have all sorts of interests aside from those that apply to Europe itself. And if you look at the Middle East, the Turks understand full well that at this point in time, they're right behind Iran on the Israeli hit list. And they fully understand that if Iran goes down, the Israelis will put their gun sights on Turkey. Former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett has made this unequivocally clear. So the Turks have a deep-seated interest in making sure that Iran survives this war. I think one could make an argument that the Turks have a vested interest in seeing Iran defeat the United States, because in defeating the United States, they're defeating Israel as well. And that is in Turkey's interest. So I find it hardly surprising that the Turks tipped off the Iranians about this situation regarding the Kurds. I'd make a number of points. First of all, I find it hard to believe that Laura Loomer has all the influence that she does in Washington. She has absolutely no credentials. She knows nothing about international politics. She's the last person that Trump should be listening to. But for some reason, he is listening to her. Second point I'd make is that she has Israel lobby written all over her. There's no question about that. And she's gone to great lengths to push forward with Trump policy moves that favor Israel. And for a long time now, and this would be my third point, it's quite clear that she was very sympathetic to Israel and pushing Israel's agenda, but she was not in support of Zelensky. But what's happened is that she's been convinced, probably by people inside the Trump administration, that it makes good sense for her to play nice with Zelensky, as well as with the Israelis and, of course, the Americans. And I think that what we have seen is that she's done this 180-degree turn on Ukraine. But does this really matter? I don't think so. The war in Ukraine is going to be settled on the battlefield. It's really between the Russians on one side and the Ukrainians and the Europeans on the other side. The Americans just don't matter that much. Trump doesn't really care. And plus, he's up to his eyeballs in alligators, as you know, in Iran. So the question of what happens in the Ukraine war doesn't matter in terms of Laura Loomer. And in terms of the Middle East, I don't think she matters much there either, because I think the Israel lobby has been exposed. People like Laura Loomer have been exposed, and their influence has been greatly diminished. Well, I think the Russophobia in the West in general is off the charts. It's worse, I think, in Europe, especially in Britain, than it is in the United States. But it is intense here in the United States. And from the very beginning of the conflict in 2014, anybody who said anything that was at all sympathetic to the Russian position was going to be pilloried. And this includes me, because I wrote a famous article in 2014 that said that the Ukraine crisis, was the West's fault. It was all due to NATO expansion, or more generally to the West's move to try and make Ukraine a Western bulwark on Russia's border. I thought this was ridiculously foolish and that it was going to lead to big trouble, which it did. But if you made that argument, as I did, you were going to end up with many bullet holes in your body. And I could take my shirt off and show you that there are many bullet holes in my body from making that argument. And the truth is that very little has changed since then. And this means that lots of people on the left, as well as the right, are super pro-Ukrainian. And that, I think, is what explains the phenomenon that you're talking about. Well, I think that for a long time, President Trump believed that he had the right formula for executing foreign policy, and that people like Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene were simply wrong-headed. And a lot of this had to do with Israel, by the way. As you know, Trump supports Israel's positions at almost every turn. It's quite remarkable. I don't think we've ever seen a president who sort of followed in lockstep what Israel wanted,
Joe
like
Biden
Trump does. He was close. He was close. There's no doubt about that. But Trump has been quite remarkable, and in that regard, and because Massey, Thomas Massey, and Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and so forth and so on, were willing to challenge Israel and thought that Israel was basically a strategic liability, not a strategic asset. Trump, given his support for Israel and given his support for the lobby, was willing to divorce himself from that.
So where does this leave us? It leaves us with a Pentagon that is gripped by war fatigue, its generals quietly admitting that they have run out of options. It leaves us with a Mossad that is in disarray, its top officials sacked for a regime change plan that was dead on arrival. It leaves us with an American administration that is desperate, foolish, and dangerously detached from reality. And it leaves us with an Iran that is standing tall, its military reshuffled and ready, its leadership unified, and its strategic position stronger than it has ever been. Mearsheimer was right. The United States has already lost this war. The question now is not whether it will accept defeat, but how much more damage it will inflict on itself and the world before it finally comes to terms with that reality. The empire is in retreat, friends, and the people of the region, from Tehran to Beirut to Gaza, are watching it crumble. The lies are falling apart. The truth is undeniable. And the future, despite all the noise and the violence, belongs to those who refuse to bow.
Had already reported first. Chilling details from the fallout of the Iran war have truly exposed Donald Trump tonight. Major US media outlets, the Washington Post and the New York Times, have now fully confirmed what this platform had already reported first. What was that? Trump's panicked secret escape from Turkey inside a decoy aircraft out of sheer fear of Iranian retaliatory strikes. The embarrassing details surrounding this flight are an absolute humiliation for both Trump and the United States on the global stage. Meanwhile, the newly appointed chief of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, Mohsen Rezai, has made it clear that the Strait of Hormuz will stay firmly closed until Washington changes its behavior and accepts Tehran's conditions. To make matters worse for the administration, the Houthis today launched their most brutal attack in the Red Sea since this latest conflict began, blowing apart a commercial tanker and killing at least 6 crew members. This will be the broad focus of my video tonight. Also in this video, we look at the viral moment a brave American Congress hopeful completely kicks out an IDF terrorist on the issue of the Gaza genocide. So please stay tuned. I hate to say, I told you so, but I told you so. Remember when the mainstream media didn't agree with us for saying Trump was panicking during the NATO summit in Turkey? Well, the truth just leaked, and it is wilder than any movie. It turns out it wasn't just precaution. It was pure, unfiltered fear of an imminent Iranian missile strike that forced the President of the United States, Donald Trump, to literally scurry for shelter. They orchestrated a massive airport switcheroo, leaving the press corps and his own staff in the sky as literal sitting ducks. Someone created an AI visual to illustrate just how Trump would have escaped from Turkey.
Shh, they're looking for me. Gotta stay quiet in here.
Comedy aside, think about the absolute irony here. This is a guy who spent years marketing himself as the ultimate alpha leader and the most powerful man on earth. He bragged about how America's adversaries trembled at his feet, and he built an entire political brand on tough talking, untouchable bravado. Yet, the second a real credible threat from Iran appeared on the radar, all that fake machismo evaporated into thin air. Instead of standing firm, the leader of the free world was smuggled past airport security like contraband. This stunning revelation shatters the illusion once and for all. When the pressure got real, the tough talk stopped and the secret catering cart escape began. Look at how CNN laid out the entire embarrassing timeline.
Newsroom, we begin with a remarkable new twist to a story already full of them. New reporting in the Washington Post about the president's return from the NATO summit in Turkey, which already included a change of planes, with the president, or so we thought, taking his old blue 747 for the first leg of the trip, instead of this new Qatari gift, red 747, which he boarded for the second leg from England back to the U.S. Now, we were told at the time it was to give troops in England a better look at the new plane, which had left Turkey earlier. That wasn't true, and everybody knew it wasn't true at the time. The switch was for security reasons, and now the Post is reporting that the threat was so severe, there was a second switch onto a third plane. The president was not on this plane at all. Instead, according to the Post, even as members of the press were boarding from the rear door, the president, who we just showed you climbing the front steps, was leaving the plane, leaving on one of these. Quoting now from the Post, he was secretly shuttled minutes later to a smaller plane, an Air Force C-32A, via an airport catering truck typically used to load meals and other supplies pre-flight, according to U.S. official and corroborating material reviewed by the Post. The Post asked the White House for comment. The White House instead provided a statement about the new 747, saying, quote, "The new Air Force One is a state-of-the-art aircraft that has been fitted with high-level security protocols that ensure the safety of the president and his staff. As the president has said recently, there are many enemies of America who have their sights on him, and we use every tool at our disposal to address those threats." Joining me now, our chief White House correspondent and anchor of The Source, Caitlin Collins. Is there any precedent for this kind of deception?
I mean, it's remarkable because even when the president goes to war zones before, which, Trump himself has done, the reporters who are traveling with him are sworn to secrecy, but they know where they're going. But, looking back on this and in that moment, it was so odd when the president said that they were sending the new Air Force One ahead so troops could tour.
I mean, it was a ridiculous
right. And
explanation.
And when they were so angry over the reporting, I mean, this prompted an entire leak investigation where they subpoenaed reporters who reported on the security threat. One conversation I had with the White House was, it's pretty obvious something happened because the president didn't fly on this new plane that he's been touting for months. But what this speaks to is, one, the seriousness of the threat that they got when it came to this Iranian threat against the president's life, and two, the levels that they were willing to go to put the president in a catering truck. And to deceive the reporters who were on board, and even some White House staff, according to the Post, who thought the president was on board that plane. And, when you're boarding Air Force One, I was just on the plane with the president last week, traveling with him. Reporters watch the president get on, and then once he's up and boards the plane, we go around back and get on the back of the plane. And typically, when the president is getting off the plane, we get off first, and then we wait for him to descend, and he comes in gaggles or whatnot, gets to the motorcade. We look back at the pool notes from the day of this trip, and the plane landed, and it was a good amount of time before the reporters exited to go and watch the president. And he got off that day, and you watched him board, deplane the old Air Force One and get on the new one. That is something pretty unusual, because when I was flying with the president a few months ago and there was an electrical issue with the Air Force One, we had to change planes, they did not let us record the president changing planes. So they made a point of showing him getting on the new plane here. But the other part of this is that on the old Air Force One, reporters are seated on the right side of the plane. During this trip, they were asked to lower their window shades on the plane, which is very unusual. Yeah. That's never happened to me. The only time I can remember that happening is when reporters go to war zones with the president.
Right. So light doesn't go through
all
the windows,
all the shades lowered. But obviously, this was the scenario where the catering truck's on the other side of the plane. Right. They didn't want reporters to see that because there's never a catering truck for Air Force One. That's very unusual. And when the president was asked later, when he was gaggling with reporters about them lowering their shades, he said because there was a threat against them and the plane. And so it's just remarkable to read this Washington Post scoop on the levels and lengths that they went to not just deceive the press, but everyone about where the president was. And effectively, the reporters and staff who were on that plane, I mean, it's serving as a decoy while he's flying on this other military aircraft.
And yet, you almost have to admire the sheer audacity of this man. Even after being smuggled across a tarmac in a food service truck out of pure panic, he's still out here demanding we take him seriously as he outlines 3 grand strategies to strike Iran.
I don't talk about strategy. Why should I talk something? Maybe, but we have 3 powerful strategies. We could just keep it along, and they're going to fail. We could just keep, doing sort of just like nice and easy, relaxed. Like I said, I'm sort of negotiating. You see, they're very devious negotiators because they'll agree to something, then they'll go out and tell the press that they did not do it. No, they're very dishonest people. So we have 3 strategies. What I'm doing now, just bop along and look how bad they're doing because the nations, they've got 300% inflation. They have no value. Their currency has almost no value. They have they're not paying their soldiers. Their soldiers are leaving. So just keep that going because that's not sustainable. Hit them really, really hard, or really the third is just beat them economically. But we're doing that anyway. That's sort of a part of the first step. So economically, they are a mess. They can't borrow money. We control their money, what they had, which is a lot. They had a lot, and we have total control of it. I'm their banker. I am their banker.
What do you even call a person who runs from a threat in secret, only to turn around and blast delusional wartime rhetoric from the safety of a microphone? It is a textbook definition of unhinged. This isn't a calculated commander-in-chief. This is what I call the deranged occupant of the White House, living in a completely alternate reality, where he thinks the public can't see the massive gap between his tough guy talk and his catering cart reality. But Iran appears to know motormouth Trump's reality. No wonder the newly appointed head of the Islamic Republic's Supreme National Security Council, Mohsen Rezai, has made it clear that there is absolutely no way the Strait of Hormuz blockade will end until the US accepts his country's conditions. This was followed by Pakistani Interior Minister Mohsin Naqvi arriving in Iran to hold talks with Iranian leaders. He also met Iranian Foreign Minister Syed Abbas Araghchi, among others.
Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has held talks with the Pakistani Interior Minister in Tehran as uncertainty continues over how Washington and Tehran can end the conflict that's now stretched over 5 months. Tawhid Asadi has more from the Iranian capital.
The Pakistani Interior Minister Mohsen Naqvi has paid a visit to Tehran, an important visit seeing his role when it comes to mediated messaging between Tehran and Washington. In the meantime, the spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs says Iranian Foreign Minister as well as the head of negotiating delegation Mohammad Baqir Ghalibaf have received invitations from Pakistan to pay a visit to Islamabad.
Iran is also busy finalizing its talks with Oman on the future management of the Strait of Hormuz. Here's what an American analyst told Al Jazeera about this development. Pay attention to his assessment of Trump's claims on Hormuz.
I'm following the logic here. Iran says we have sort of worked out the protocol with Oman of where ships would go, the whole traffic separation. That's all ready to go, right? That's what you told us. That's ready to go if and when the U.S. agrees to Iran's demands. First of all, am I right that that's where we are now?
Pretty much, but don't forget the one thing that you didn't include, Cyril, was that it's a temporary arrangement. Yes. Iran is not saying we've worked out a permanent solution. They still want to negotiate that, but they have worked out a temporary solution, and this is in line with what they were doing before, where ships go through hugging the northern route in Iranian coastal waters, and perhaps they exit the strait in the southern route through Omani coastal waters with the Iranian agreement. Because don't forget, the old highway route that the ships used to use through the center of the strait is still mined, so no one's going through that.
Well, I would say that Donald Trump said, I think it was 48 hours ago now, that they've demined, they've swept for mines the whole strait. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but he did make that statement in public. Okay, well,
yeah, it's not true.
That was only 48 hours ago from the U.S. president.
Prominent Iranian professor Syed Mohammad Marandi thinks that the elevation of Mohsen Rezai for the top security job by Ayatollah Mujtaba Khamenei shows a total paradigm shift in the Iranian strategy.
One of the important implications is the message that it sends, that Iran is openly declaring all of its key military officials, and therefore it shows that Iran is no longer as concerned as it was before about the enemy attacking and assassinating and murdering our key commanders. Also, as you definitely know, the president, Dr. Pezeshkian, met Ayatollah Khamenei for a meeting that lasted 7 to 8 hours. And he effectively spent the entire day with Ayatollah Sayyid Mujtaba Khamenei, which again shows the degree to which the state is functioning normally despite the threat of war, despite the fact that U.S. forces in Kuwait, in Oman, in Saudi Arabia, in Bahrain, in Qatar, in the United Arab Emirates, and in Jordan, they are always a threat to, and in the Israeli regime, they're always a threat to the country. And there's a possibility that they could carry out a major assault against the country at any time. But despite that, we see that normalization is taking place, and the state is very confident about its position, about its leaders, about security, and about its ability to defend itself and the Iranian people against the regime in Washington and Trump.
Then the ultimate betrayal happened on Trump's absolute favorite TV outlet, Fox News. Congressman Jake Auchincloss went on live television and explicitly announced the epic humiliation of this Israeli slave, declaring to millions of viewers that Trump has officially cemented his legacy as the first US president in history to single-handedly start and lose a war all by himself. Ouch! Just imagine the absolute meltdown taking place behind closed doors after hearing that on his own preferred network.
Well, Peter, I know Donald Trump watches your show, and so I will say to him directly, Mr. Trump, you are the first president in American history to start and lose a war by yourself. You have made America more weak, more alone, and less respected. Congress has to take back the steering wheel from this impaired driver before we end up in a third quagmire in the Middle East of the 21st century. That starts with ending the escalation. He keeps on trying to escalate vertically, meaning more effects on target. Iran escalates horizontally, bringing in other regional players, other infrastructure assets into the fight. Iran is winning that escalation ratchet. We got to stop it. We got to negotiate transit through the Strait of Hormuz. Then we have to strengthen the Abraham Accords. But that is going to be a decadal process. It's not going to happen in this guy's term because he's too incompetent.
Then the Israeli slave had to face another episode of humiliation on the Houthi front as Yemen's Ansarullah fighters violently exploded tonight by launching deadly barrage of ballistic missiles, completely shutting down Saudi Arabia's alternative oil routes along the Red Sea. They also blew apart a Tanzania-flagged cargo ship in Bab el-Mandeb Strait, killing at least 6 crew members, including the rescue team, while simultaneously dropping suicide drones directly onto a Saudi Aramco oil refinery in Jizan. With Iran maintaining its iron grip on the Strait of Hormuz, this devastating Houthi naval blockade has forced a panicked Saudi Arabia to completely halt all crude oil loading along its western coast. Saudi Arabia is also now backed into a corner, desperately weighing a massive ground offensive to try and retake the Hodeidah shoreline before the entire energy economy collapses. Saudi Arabia has been placed in a tight spot by a bunch of determined fighters from Yemen. It will be interesting to see how the Islamic Kingdom now responds to this massive escalation. Isn't it quite extraordinary that two sets of armies, Iran's IRGC and Yemen's Ansarullah fighters, are sending shockwaves across West Asia despite having been written off by so-called military experts only a few months ago? I will now leave you with this stunning video of American activist and congressional candidate Dennis Fietosa completely kicking out ex-IDF commander Yosef Haddad during Sean Kelly's Digital Social Hour podcast over his role in the Gaza genocide. This confrontation turned chaotic and violent pretty quickly, erupting into a physical brawl inside the studio that spilled straight out into the parking lot. This stunning footage simply proves that these people are finding it impossible to hide in the US anymore, as more and more Americans openly show their total disgust toward the genocidal entity. The unedited video, you can watch it on our Telegram channel. Details on your screen and also in the description of this video.
You can't do shit, my brother.
Dude, stop it. You want to play?
Hey. You can't do shit. Please don't. You're gonna. I told you you can't do shit. Stop.
Already today is Tuesday, August 11th, 2026, and our dear friend Larry Johnson is here with us. Welcome back, Larry.
I'm back. Tanned, rusted, and ready.
Yeah. Let's go, Larry. Let me start with this article on Fox News. They're talking about that the Pentagon plans to dramatically increase purchases of PAC-3 and THAAD interceptor missiles in fiscal 2027, seeking roughly 10 times more than in 2026, according to Army budget document reviewed by Fox News, as you see in this article. It says that in the details of this is that the Army is seeking 3,655 interceptors as the U.S. moves to rapidly expand its missile defense stockpiles and production capacity after years of relatively limited procurement. And they're talking about PAC-3 and the THAAD, and they said that the purchases declined from 328 missiles in 2022 to 214 in 2025 before rising to 320 in 2026. Those
numbers aren't right, because there's other numbers saying they produced 500 in 2025, and they produced 620 in 2025, and they're still sort of on that trajectory, producing about 55 per month.
Yeah.
So okay, go ahead.
The THAAD procurement was even lower. It says that with just 11 interceptors purchased in 2024 and 12 in 2025. I don't know what can you do with 11 interceptors. It's just amazing, the number. And 12 in 2025, rising to 30 to a planned 37 in 2026. And the Army also
for PAC-3s?
THAAD, for the THAAD system.
THAAD, yes, the THAAD, yes.
Yeah, the Army has also more than quadrupled its overall PAC-3 acquisition objective, and increasing from 3,376 to 13,773. And it's a huge sort of increase if this is the PAC-3 they're talking about.
Yeah, they're not going to do that. So they need neodymium iron boron magnets. Who provides those? China. And then they need samarium cobalt magnets. Again, who provides those? China. without those rare earth minerals, they just got a rocket that is useless.
In September, we're going to have Xi Jinping coming to the United States. I assume one of the main objectives of Donald Trump in those meetings that he's going to have with Xi Jinping is going to be all about the rare earth minerals.
Well, good luck convincing the Chinese that, hey, send us your rare earth so we can build weapons that we can use to kill you.
The case of Taiwan is as well, they're increasing the air defense, the defense budget in Taiwan by 12% at least. These are.
They can't buy their way out with these. That's the problem. It is. China still, they don't necessarily have a monopoly, but so China doesn't, they only control like 60 to 70% of the rare earth mineral production, but they produce, when it comes to refining and separation, they control 91% of the rare earth output in the world. And
you're talking about 90% of those refined rare earth minerals?
Yes, of the refined. And when you get to the high temperature magnets that we're talking about, the dysprosium, terbium, and samarium, the share approaches 99 to 100%. So they have, over those particular magnets, they've got they've got total control. And the permanent magnets that, even the permanent magnets that the PAC-3s also need, China controls 94% of the neodymium iron boron magnets. And those are the ones most relevant to missile guidance, fin actuators, and seekers. I said, go ahead, appropriate all the money you want. You still got to get those from China, and China's going to say, there are two. Yes, Mr. President, there are two ways you can have them. No way and no way in hell. Okay?
Yeah. We had Larry, the new head of Iran National Security Council. Today he tweeted that the Strait of Hormuz will not reopen until the United States ends the war and blockade, releases Iran's frozen assets and agrees to a region-wide ceasefire, including Lebanon and Gaza. Until all conditions are met, the strait will remain closed.
Oh, well, Neiman, that's not true. Donald Trump said it's open. So, the strait's open. My goodness. Sorry.
Do you see the signs of attack happening? Or because the day I talked with Morandi, he said that their assessment is that the United States wants to attack.
Yeah, the part of the United States wants to attack. There are certainly those calling for it. But then they run up against reality. Attack with what? To accomplish what? So that's the problem. There's some speculation that that there was that report that came out. I guess it came out of Iran, claiming that the Gulf Arabs were mobilizing for a massive strike on Iran. And I thought, give me a break. That's nonsense. What? The Kuwait army, the Qatari army, the Saudi army? The Saudis can't even handle the damn Houthis. But now all of a sudden they're going to go try to attack Iran? Absolute nonsense.
Saudi, today we've learned about Yemeni attack on Saudi troops. And they said that the weapons depots and the Saudi troop concentrations, they were all attacked. They have killed generals. They have killed high-rank Saudi officials in Yemen. In the part, they were in Mocha. I don't know if it's so close, that region that Saudi officials were in. It's so, let me just bring it here just to understand where is that, because it's so important for our audience to see where is the fight going on between Saudi Arabia and Yemen. Here is, Larry, do you see this?
Okay.
And here is Yemen.
Yeah.
Here is Yemen. And Mocha is somewhere here, Larry.
Uh-huh.
In the southern part of Yemen, here.
Right.
And it shows, I don't know how, Sana'a is under the control of Yemenis, of Ansarullah. And they have these forces down right close to the Bab al-Mandab. And the fight is going on there. And this is just amazing. I don't know how do they get their forces there and what is the situation inside Yemen. But it seems the fight is so much violent, the fight that is going on between the two sides. They had ambulances last night, Saudi ambulances.
This is deja vu all over again. They're replaying what they've done for the last 14 years. The Houthis have always had the advantage militarily, both in terms of size of their army and with their ballistic missiles. That gives them the decided edge.
Do you, Larry, we've learned today that the former Mossad chief, Yossi Cohen, he said that Mossad agents had visited the Iran's underground Fordo nuclear facility many times to better understand the site. He described the 2025 U.S. bombing of Fordo as the realization of all my dreams, he said, and said that Iran's enriched uranium to 60% remains far from a nuclear bomb. They believe that the attack, I remember I talked with Professor Ted Postel when the attack happened. He mentioned how these sites are working because they hit the target right above the Fordo. Some sort of how do you call it? It's some sort of tunnel, vertical tunnel that goes in. Yeah. And he was mentioning the tunnel is not that straight. It has some curves along the tunnel.
Yeah, so that they can deflect the blast and preserve the structure underground. And they also built into those curves, they got absorbing material to reduce vibration, etc.
But it seems the perception on the part of Israel and the United States is they have destroyed that site, and those, that enriched uranium is under the rubble, and maybe under, that's why they call it the dust. Donald Trump called it.
Okay, then what's to worry? It's like if it's destroyed, why worry?
Yeah, I think he's making the case that if they're not that much worried, why do you need to continue the war?
Exactly. That's where the logic of this leads.
Larry, how do you see the reason that Israel would somehow stop participating in the war? And we know that they have their forces in Gaza, they have their forces in Lebanon, in Syria, in that part of Syria as well. How many forces do they have? How many do they need to stay there?
Not enough. They don't have enough. They're too small. But those forces are meaningless with respect to Iran. The only thing that's meaningful is if Israel's able to get its aircraft in the air and they get refueled to carry out strikes in Iran. The problem with that is I don't think the Saudis would give permission for U.S. air refuelers to overfly them and refuel Israeli aircraft. Because if they do, then Iran will strike Saudi Arabia. It is payback.
Do you see the reason? Today I talked with Marandi. He doesn't think that the target of the new military pact is Israel. He disagrees with you. I would say with me about because
what we need to call this it's the Middle East Treaty Organization, okay? And we know what we call it for short, not NATO. Me Too. It's the Me Too organization. Look, here's the reason I think they formed it. And again, you tell me, is it symbolic that they did it at Mecca and not Riyadh?
It is, in my opinion.
I think it's highly significant. I don't think that was just, hey, want to meet Mecca? Let's flip a coin. No, it wasn't a coin flip. They were sending a message. Now, for Turkey in particular, Israel is vowed to attack Turkey. If Turkey is attacked under NATO, under Article 5, they should be able to rally the rest of the NATO crowd to come defeat Israel. Does anybody out there seriously believe that France and the UK and Germany are going to sign up to go attack Israel? Hell no. So from Turkey's standpoint, they're lining up a Middle East alliance that will be with them. Now, the Saudis are useless militarily. I said they can't even handle the Houthis. But if the Turks are backed up with a nuclear-powered Pakistan, that's a game changer. So that's why I think that this was done. I understand Professor Morandi's caution that this very well could be turned against Iran potentially or the Houthis. But so far we've had multiple Houthi attacks, and neither Turkey or Pakistan has said, "Oh, that's outrageous. We need to," No, they're not getting involved. And in fact, I think it was Foreign Minister Fidan of Turkey said yesterday, I think we talked about this, he made a point, no, this is not for attacking Muslims.
Because the majority of the people in these countries would not be interested in attacking any of these Muslim countries. With the case of Yemen, I would say huge.
Yeah, I mean,
different.
With Yemen, we're dealing with like a 1,400-year conflict. 1,300 years that go back to this argument over who's the right successor of the Prophet. The Shias believe that the grandson was the legitimate heir, right?
Yeah.
And the Sunnis said no. It's our guy. And hell, they've been warring over that for centuries.
I don't see that sentiment being there anymore. Today, when I look at the West Asia, and I really feel that they're coming together. I'm talking about the people. And these governments may have different sort of understanding, but that doesn't necessarily represent their people.
Yeah, we can update the Beatles song, come together right now over Me Too. Oh, sorry. When you say these phrases, the music just pops in my brain.
Yeah.
Instead of come together over me, it's come together over Me Too. Catchy tune.
Let me, Larry, the point that comes to, the main question would be for Donald Trump today is, if with this report on Fox News, let's assume they're right, they're going to get it by 2027. In 2027, Donald Trump would have one more year, or maybe 1.5 years to finalize his presidency, to put an end to his his time in office in Washington. What does he want from the remaining time of his presidency? Does he really want to continue? Does he really want to stay in this fight? And today we learned the price of oil is almost $90 per barrel, 89.73. And there is some sort of confusion, I assume. I don't know if that's happening in the mind of GCC countries as well, but nobody knows what's going on.
Oh, they're still trying to cover up the price. Yeah, Brent is 89, West Texas Intermediate is 83. And the price of oil is going to continue to climb. The diesel, the key is looking at diesel. What's the price of diesel? What's the price of aviation fuel?
It's good for Donald Trump to keep it on basically he's talking mostly about the nuclear program of Iran. He didn't change his position so far. Every time he's asked, he says that they're not going to get a nuclear, they're not going to have nukes. They're not going to produce nukes. They're not going to buy nukes. And this is achievable, after all, for him, if he decides to do something.
Correct. Look, he has only military options on paper, but no real viable military option.
Larry, here, I don't know if you heard that Russia is using, to understand the situation with the interceptors and the air defense system, you see the same cases happening in Ukraine. Today, they have mentioned, Ukrainians are reporting daily on the missiles, on the drones that they have intercepted. They have, yesterday they have reported that they intercepted something like 98 drones out of 120 Russian drones. But there is no mention of missiles being intercepted in the reports, on the Ukrainian reports. It means that
they don't have interceptors. That's the problem.
How do you see Russia using this leverage that they're having right now to finalize the war?
They're beating the stuffing out of Ukraine. Ukraine, by shutting down Odessa port, so they shut down a major way to resupply the army with weapons and other important items to support the population. And they've cut off Ukraine's ability to ship grain overseas to get paid. So, that's that's significant.
Let me bring something. We know that Benjamin Netanyahu, in his last visit of the United States, he was asked about the settlers attacking and setting things on fire in the West Bank. He said that these people, he was so much under the pressure from the media to comment on that. He said that these are thugs, and we're trying to do everything to bring some sort of sanity in the West Bank. Here is what Ofer Kasef, member of Knesset, said, Larry, about what's going on.
understand, it's not terrorism of settlers. The settlers are the proxies of the government and the occupation forces. This is a clear state terrorism. They finance that, they support it, and they encourage it. This is something. So I've been today to Melchir, to Tuba, where the people, very poor people, their houses were set in fire by settlers last Wednesday. People were almost burned to death there. A pregnant woman, her arm was broken by a settler. Everything is accompanied by the occupation forces and by the government, encouraged, as I said, and financed by the government. And same here in the area of Taibe. Those Palestinian communities, good people, people who just want to live normal lives in freedom, in equality, just life. That's it. They don't expect and they don't seek to harm anyone, just to live. This is a part of the extermination project, of the ethnic cleansing. And that's the reason why it is so difficult to stop, because the government doesn't want to stop it.
Yeah. You're exactly right. Until the Muslim nations rise up to say this must stop, it's going to continue. Until Turkey stops shipping oil to Israel, it's going to continue. It's a stain. It's a stain on these Muslim nations that do nothing.
There would be nothing. I think the only hope I see is the new position of the Iranian government, and they're mentioning more Gaza after the MOU being violated. Right now, in each and every announcement they had, they're mentioning Gaza and Palestine. I don't know how much pressure can they put on Washington or maybe to the Muslim countries. There is no sign that these countries going to come together. No sign, simply. Saudi Arabia is asking them, it seems, for this military and defense pact. Saudi Arabia is asking Pakistan and Turkey coming together, but there is no sign of some sort of comprehensive, move on their part when it comes to Palestine. And Donald Trump he's basically supporting all Israel wants, and he's not avoiding anything.
Right.
And the Israeli minister today said, for the first time I heard the foreign minister of Israel, he said that it's been a year, nothing was built in Gaza. So how can someone imagine that they're going to change the situation in Gaza anytime soon? You can imagine how much pressure is on people in Gaza.
Right. No, like I said, it was incredible. The bravery, the perseverance of the people of Gaza. Because, they're fighting a losing battle. And it is up to the other countries in the region, the Arab and Muslim countries, to stand up and say, this must stop.
The Financial Times, Larry, reported that UAE has transformed itself from a source of suspicion in Washington into one of America's closest Middle Eastern partners through decades of lobbying, investment, and strategic diplomacy.
And that's another word for saying that they are well-paid prostitutes. They've always been a tool of Israel.
How do you see I thought that Qatar would have a better, sort of communications with Donald Trump and his administration. But Donald Trump, you see the United States supporting, mentioning UAE being in that position. It's somehow different from what we've heard before.
Yeah. And, Qatar's are getting punched in the stomach by Trump. They put themselves front and being They've been the major base for U.S. forces in the region. And what has that bought them? Has that bought them loyalty? Has that bought them the United States backing them unreservedly? Oh, hell no. Not at all.
They reported the second suicide in Israel. Will Shakin, he's a soldier from New York, and he's the second in 24 hours he committed suicide. These are the forces. For a population of 7 to 8 million people, I assume most of these people are, I don't know if the Arab Israelis they can be part of the army in Israel, Arab Israelis?
Yes.
Or are they part of the army?
Yes, some are, yes.
Then,
I mean, I have a friend, Ali, who lives here in my neighborhood. He's actually married to a Jewish woman, but his family still lives in the old city of Jerusalem. But he served in the Israeli army, and he's Muslim.
they don't have this sort of security issue with them, because we know that some parts of the government, they cannot go to some positions into the government.
Well, look, part of the problem is there's still, we still see some sort of the same naivety that was demonstrated by Eastern European Jews during the Holocaust. Thinking, oh, the Germans are civilized. They'd never do this to us. Oh, they did it. And there's some Palestinians that say, oh, the Israelis are civilized. Surely we can find an accommodation. No, you can't. I'm not talking the Zionist government. There are Israelis, Jews, who are very, as the guy that was highlighted earlier, that are horrified by this.
Yeah.
But they're unfortunately, they're a minority voice. They're not a majority voice.
They don't have that much of leverage. But by the way, if I'm not mistaken, Ofer Kasef, he's part of the left wing in Israel, which somehow they have been disappearing from the political system in Israel. He's the left wing sort of, I don't know, but they're not that powerful anymore in Israel.
Well, there's left wing, but does that mean they reject the current effort of the Israelis to wipe out Hamas? No, I don't think so. I think they're supportive of that policy. They're not demanding a policy change, to my knowledge. Maybe I'm mistaken.
There were two reports today, one of them from Qatar and the other one from Pakistan. The government of Qatar said they talk with Iranians, and with the Omani government, they said that they're so positive about the outcome of that. It seems that they're finalizing the new mechanism of the Strait of Hormuz. And the other one was the Pakistani defense minister, and Khawaja Asif. And he says that the United States and Iran are nearing an arrangement over the Strait of Hormuz, despite both sides recently talking tougher positions in the negotiations. Things are shaping up in favor of peace. And
yeah, I know. Yeah, I know that's exactly what the Pakistanis believe. I think they're kidding themselves, personally.
Is that the communication they had between Iran and Pakistan, between the United States and Pakistan, or they're somehow, because there is no sign in Iran that there would be, nobody's talking about making an agreement. And how
Right.
about the tone with the Trump administration about these sort of reports, these positive reports, by the way?
Yeah, no, I think it's. I think there's they're deluding themselves. We'll see. We've had these reports before. I mean, I just before coming on air, received on the Cambodia. There's actually much more progress in negotiations behind the scenes. Vance is leading it. And it's possible that Vance may believe that he's making progress, but as has happened so often in the past, Trump can do a quick reversal and sandbag it and destroy it.
Is there anybody in the Trump administration who's going to have, who's going to be willing to continue the talks or get back to the MOU, Larry? Have you heard anybody?
Yeah, well, like I just said, J.D. Vance.
He's alone then.
Well, I don't know if he's alone. I don't know if he's got support from General Kane. Possible. And maybe Trump has said, "Hey, get me out of this mess. Do what you can." So maybe that's what he's doing. That's what he's trying to do right now. Broker a deal that will get Trump out of the doghouse here.
Whenever we talk about Pakistan, we know that there is something going on inside Pakistan with the case of Imran Khan. It's been a while we didn't talk about Larry.
Right.
And who's behind this case of Imran Khan? Do you think the United States is behind it, or it's something internal, something inside Pakistan? It's a game of power inside.
But it doesn't have to be either or. It can be both, right?
Yeah.
So, I think it's a combination of the two.
Because the guy wanted to be a good player in that area. He went to Russia. The war started. He went to Russia. He was communicating with China, with the United States. He wanted a better relationship with everybody.
And the United States, working with us and Munir, made sure that didn't happen.
The structure of power in Pakistan is somehow complicated. If Asim Munir can do that to the prime minister of Pakistan, it means how the army is so powerful, so mighty in Pakistan.
Yes, up to a point. Yes, you're correct. They do have some reach. They definitely are a powerful force to contend with. But they're and Munir, he keeps a tight leash on everybody. That's for sure.
The CENTCOM, the headquarters of the CENTCOM was, they have, removed that from, if I'm not mistaken, from Jordan. Right now is in Israel. Is that correct, Larry? The CENTCOM, the command.
What do you mean?
I'm talking about this.
The headquarters is moved to Israel?
Yeah.
I don't know. I would presume that's the case. Yes.
It was because the head of National Security Council, the new head of National Security Council of Iran said that they moved to Israel. Right now, they're not in Jordan. They have the forces, they have the weapons in Jordan, in other countries, but CENTCOM right now is commanded from Israel.
Yeah, no, well, CENTCOM's commanded, the forward command will be in Israel, but Brad Cooper's sitting back with MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa.
Who's going to be the next, Larry? Because with the case of Europe, that they have the guy who was removed from his position in Europe, I don't remember his name.
Casanova.
Yeah, who's going to be? Yeah,
I've not heard anything about his replacement yet, and it's still not clear why it was removed.
it seems that because of the way that they were asking to send weapons to CENTCOM, and CENTCOM was asking about more weapons. He was somehow afraid of his position in Europe, and in the case of
it wasn't weapons. They wanted destroyers from the Sixth Fleet to be positioned off the coast of Israel to provide air defense. And the commander of EUCOM, Grinkowicz, he refused to do that. He's still in position.
Politico reported that the European countries are scrambling to find additional Patriot interceptors for Ukraine as Kiev seeks to strengthen its defenses against an expected Russian winter missile campaign. Russia, this winter, Larry, I think since the war started, every year we said that the winter going to be difficult for Ukraine, but this one going to be so difficult because they only have the drones to fight back.
Right. Yeah.
What else do they have?
This is shaping up to be more challenging. That's for sure.
And if Russia decides to advance in the eastern part of Ukraine, how do you see the Ukrainian forces? Are they going to? Do they have the forces there?
No, they don't. I mean, Ukraine is shy of manpower, and Russia's ramping up. They're positioning themselves to both retake Odessa and retake Kyiv.
What is today I talked with John Helmer. He believes that he mentioned the reason that I'm saying that many people, the people are thinking differently about the military pact between the three countries in the West Asia. He said that the whole coalition, this new pact is against Russia and Iran. And he mentioned that Russia is getting back.
Whoa. That's nonsense. What's his evidence for that?
I don't know. The case of Russia, he was mentioning the situation in Syria and the competition between Russia and Turkey in Syria. And he even mentioned India. I was confused. I asked John, why do you mention India? What does it have to do with India, the pact between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia and Turkey? India is basically right now with the United States and Israel and UAE.
Well, sort of, because they're also maintaining very good relations with Russia because they need Russia's oil. Yeah, so this alliance, it's not an alliance against Russia and Iran. No, he can. Look, he's welcome to believe it. Can I prove him wrong? No. I have a different opinion. I'll put it that way.
It shows how different is this situation is for everybody, because everybody's sitting back saying, this is against me. That all sides. Israelis, two of the Israeli officials today said that.
But what have the Iranians said?
No, Iranian didn't say.
No, Iran said they welcomed it.
It welcomed, not just only
Ghalibaf said he welcomed it.
Exactly.
So at least two key Iranian officials aren't seeing it as a threat to them. And I would give credence to John's assertion if both Turkey and Pakistan had now responded militarily against the Houthis or against the Popular Militia Front. But they haven't, despite attacks and the claim that this agreement requires if Saudis attack, then Pakistan and Turkey are supposed to treat it as an attack on themselves or respond. They haven't responded.
The case of the other point that John raised today was the air defense systems S-400 in Russia, in Turkey. He said maybe under this new pact, they can sell them to Saudi Arabia, which is in an active war with Iran. And
why would Turkey divest itself of air defense systems?
Because they want to buy F-35 from the United States. That's one of the main conditions.
Yeah, I think that's nonsense. I think the Turks finally realized buying the F-35 is just buying a piece of junk, an expensive piece of junk.
There is no sign since then. They talk about it in Turkey. Last visit of Donald Trump. Since then, we haven't heard about the S-400 or F-35 being, Donald Trump, or the timeline, the timetable of those fighter jets to be sent to.
Well, in fact, Trump said the deal was dead because Turkey wasn't going to give up the S-400.
No, he said that he's not going to send them to Turkey?
Correct. Yeah, that was like 4 weeks ago. Well, within a week of that visit and that claim, then it got basically shot down.
Larry, do you think that Israel recently, Benjamin Netanyahu said they're going to produce new fighter jets on their own? They're going to produce them without the United States. But
sure they are. Sure they are. I'm sure. Man, it's going to be such a magnificent plane. You're going to need some rare earth minerals, though. Where are they going to get those?
But after all, looking at the war in Ukraine and the war in the West Asia, do you think that's going to be a good strategy for the countries to buy fighter jets instead of producing some alternative options, which we know worked in Ukraine, worked in the West Asia? Maybe new drones, new missiles, new air defense systems would be more applicable to the battlefield.
Yes. No, you're right. That's why it's so silly. But look, 5th generation fighters, hell, the 6th generation was supposed to come online. They're anachronisms. They're no longer really relevant like they were once because of advanced air defense systems that Russia has. And because of drones and other, it's just for the expense, like F-35 is $100 million a piece, and they're having to sell them now without the nose radars because they can't get the magnets out of China.
The problem for those countries who are gonna, correct me if I'm mistaken, Larry, when you are on defensive, you have a lot of leverage to defend yourself. But when you go on offensive, you need the fighter jets. Because without the fighter jets, how can you put a lot of missiles, on these aircraft carriers? It's impossible to.
Well, you need the fighter jets, and you also need the missiles, which they don't have.
I'm talking about ballistic missiles. If you decide to go on offensive with ballistic missiles, that's impossible, quite impossible.
Well, ballistic missiles have nothing to do with the aircraft.
I know. That's why I'm asking you that those countries who are defending, Russia is fighting Ukraine on its soil. They don't need to go that far because Ukraine and Russia are so close. And I'm talking about the United States in this ongoing fight with Iran. They're learning something that if they go against China in Taiwan, so with these fighter jets, they're not going to have any sort of upper hand.
Look, I mean, that's the only way the United States can go at China. unless they start launching, nuclear missiles.
Yeah.
They'd have to launch, bring in destroyers and try to launch missiles into China. And China will light them. China can light them up with drone swarms that they've never even imagined, coupled with hypersonic missiles, anti-ship cruise missiles. Yeah, no, it's just, it's a silly concept.
Let me bring the map of the Arctic, Larry, here, because it seems to me as time goes by, Donald Trump somehow been disappointed with what's going on with the case of West Asia. He's going to move on Greenland. And here you see two routes on close to Russia, and the other route is close to the Canadian border. You see the Greenland here in the middle.
Right.
If we assume that Donald Trump captures Greenland, he wants to dominate the route that passes close to the border of Canada. Is that the plan? Because Greenland doesn't have anything to do with these two routes.
Yeah. And the problem the United States has is to traverse that route, got to have icebreakers. The United States doesn't have icebreakers. They've got they've got a few icebreakers. They're outdated technology. Like, Russia's got nuclear powered icebreakers, at least 4, maybe 5. And their icebreakers are still state of the art, even the old ones that are not powered nuclearly. So,
was these icebreakers that Russia has, was that part of the negotiation, the talks in Anchorage, in Alaska?
I don't know. The talks would have been what? When we use your icebreakers? That would have been maybe the focus of the talks. But because the United States is having trouble building them, even in a timely manner, and they're having to rely upon, I think, the Norwegians to build their icebreakers.
Larry, today, let's assume today they open up the Strait of Hormuz and the country is getting back to their business. How long does it take for the global market to get back to what it was before the war started?
Minimum 6 months, maybe more likely 2 years, 3 years. Because there's a lot of damage that was done in Qatar to Rosneft, the liquid natural gas oil field, and the pump, the wells, and how they extract it. And then when they extract it, they also extract helium. The reports I've seen suggest repairing that facility is going to take 2 to 3 years. So
it means that it's going to be Donald Trump going to be gone by that.
Yes, yeah, he won't be around. He won't be around to see it. That's for sure.
It's maybe he said something about Chuck Schumer. He basically, every time he's talking about Chuck Schumer, he says that he's a Palestinian. He's fighting for Palestinian. He's doing this and that. But on the other hand, in the Democratic Party, you see the people the same way. They don't see, that much from Chuck Schumer. That's why you see the leadership of the Democratic Party. Chuck Schumer is the leadership of the Democratic Party. That's why you see the people are not happy with that. They want to change the leadership of the NC.
Right.
And these people are, do you see any time, is that going to happen anytime soon? Remove from their position. I'm talking about Chuck Schumer and like the guy whose name just escaped me, the guy who has I forgot his name. Who's part of the leadership in Democratic Party?
You mean Hakeem Jeffries?
Hakeem Jeffries, yeah, exactly.
The leader of he's the minority leader in the House of Representatives.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, they've got some real challenges here. The Democrats are split. The Republicans are split. There's no unity on either side, so it's going to be a big mess come November. The Republicans might be able to hold on if the Democrats put up all these Democrat socialists as candidates. That will be, off-putting to many Americans.
Do you see the possibility that those Democrats, some of these Democrats, going to vote for Republicans instead of avoiding?
Yeah, potentially. Or they'll just stay home. Same can happen with Republicans. There'll be some put off with the more rhinos. They'll stay home. So, like I said, it's not a good situation for either party. And if the war's still dragging on, that's not going to give Trump more support, just the opposite.
Donald Trump is in the negotiations with the Cuban, and he wants, I wouldn't be surprised if something happens in Cuba, Larry.
Yeah, it might. And there'll just be one more, you get the United States bogged down in another war. It'll be a guerrilla war. And then they'll be economically responsible for Cuba. Really create some problems for themselves.
Is that going to be the same way that we've seen with Venezuela, or you feel that
no, it'll be different. I mean, in Venezuela, the CIA had bought off a number of people. The CIA is not going to have that success in Cuba.
Venezuela recognized, the Israeli occupation of. First of all, they say, because there was no relationship between Israel and Venezuela. Right now, you see they're improving drastically the relationship between the two sides. Today, we've learned, Benjamin Netanyahu, he said that this is, he's talking about the Colombian government recognizing the Israeli, sovereignty, the Israeli sovereignty over Golan Heights. And he's so happy about the Colombian government recognizing that.
Yeah, Colombia is irrelevant. I mean, it really is. Who cares what they think? They're not a global power. The only thing they're good at is exporting cocaine.
Yeah. Let me just, Larry, thank you so much for being with us today.
All right, my friend.
And see you tomorrow.
5 o'clock?
5 o'clock.
All right.
Exactly.
I'll put you on the schedule. See you then.
Yeah. See you.
Okay.
See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
To those that you might listen to on mainstream media in the United States. Whether that's true on the ground or not, let's just call us a little bit skeptical and to try and divine the truth from the fiction. We have back with us today the ever-popular Colonel Douglas Macgregor, defense and foreign policy analyst and former advisor to Secretary of Defense and highly decorated combat veteran. Doug, as always, welcome back.
Hey, thanks.
Well, listen, let's get right into this part here because, wow. I mean, if you've been watching this war since last February, people may be a little surprised to find out that we are in firm control of this, but that's what the President of the United States had to say this morning.
The only one that has control of the Strait of Hormuz right now is the United States Navy. We have a blockade that's been infallible. It's a steel wall. And we let people in that we want to let in, and those people come in, and they've been coming in and they're going out. So it's actually open now. We do not let them go into Iran.
So, okay, if we have a blockade, it is effective. It's not foolproof, but it is effective at largely stopping Iranian transports out or stuff into Iran. That part is true. But I mean, to say that we're in control of it and that we decide what comes in and what goes out and that it's open, I mean, how do you get by with that now in nearly the 6 month of war?
Well, I think we have to say that the traffic is down by a factor of 90% from what it was before the war. Any way you calculate it, that's nothing short of a disaster for the global economy. So if his, principal aim is to somehow or another harm or sabotage or subvert the global economy, I think that's working very well. As far as influencing Iran, there's no evidence that anything we're doing is influencing Iran at this point.
And the question is that going to change? I mean, what is happening right now? Because actually, I got one more here from President Trump. I said this morning, it was yesterday. But he's saying, listen, we're kind of taking a low-key approach to this and we're semi-negotiating.
They asked for reparations, you might say, or they asked for money for the damage that we've done. I said, that's a good idea. Well, we're going to ask for money for the damage they've done over a 50-year period.
The president's new strategy is to inflict maximum economic pain on the country. The Treasury is tightening its grip with more sanctions on the regime.
We are low-keying it militarily, adding, we are only semi-negotiating with them. We're just watching Iran with its huge inflation and the fact they have no money.
Now, again, the blockade is having a negative effect on Iran, and it is causing inflation and several other things. But is that going to be enough to cause them to have economic hardship before our economic hardship hits harder?
I think that's the right question, and I think the answer is no. It's going to hit us very hard in the fall, as we've talked about. All the effects of the downturn in traffic to the Strait of Hormuz, the fact that 40% of the world's sulfur comes out of the strait and none of it's coming out, all these kinds of things. And I think that Donald Trump should consider writing a new book. I think his last book was The Art of the Deal. He's an expert now. He should sit down and write a book called The Art of Defeat, because that's what he's mastered. We are defeated. And nothing he does at this point is going to make any difference. And the Iranians have made that very clear. That's why they said they have no intention of negotiating with this administration. They'll wait until he leaves office, presumably in 2029. I think he might go earlier. But having said that, they know that we are not governed per se by Donald Trump or the voice of the American people. These institutions and the people in them have all been purchased by the Zionist Jewish billionaires who are actually in control. And there's no point in talking to them. You might as well try to talk to Netanyahu. And I think they know that's a waste of time.
Let's take a look at some of the economic stuff here, because there is a school of thought that there are those here, and we're going to see some of those voices later in this show, that are saying, hey, there's economic pain on Iran, and there's some on us too, but it's going to hit them harder. But there is one factor. You mentioned the fertilizer. There's another factor that's right now with jet fuel. Is actually getting closer to being a critical issue. There have been some analysts I saw just yesterday that said there's maybe 3 or 4 weeks left that can handle the current economic activity at the current status. And then they're going to have to start curtailing and cutting out, either dramatically raising the price of airline traffic. And that's everything, not just passengers, but also transport, et cetera. Or they're going to have to start cutting routes, because they just physically don't have enough jet fuel at any price. And you see U.S. carriers are also taking a financial hit. That's something that will probably hit before the end of the month. And without the strait being fully open, and that means both sides, that's going to be a problem. How are we going to mitigate that?
Well, I don't think we can, frankly, unless we wise up and essentially disengage from the war. One of the things I wrote recently was the importance now for the United States, as well as for virtually all the nations of the world, to start building towards resource sovereignty. What we're saying is that access to food, fuel, feed, fertilizer, precious metals and minerals can't depend on distant choke points anymore. The days when the United States Navy secured global seaways are over. I mean, that's the principal defeat. He says the United States Navy is doing a brilliant job controlling the strait. Well, it's parked outside of the strait, far enough away that if it's taken under attack, it has a chance to avoid being struck. What is the U.S. Navy actually doing other than harming the global economy and our own? It certainly isn't helping us in terms of our national security. So I think ultimately what happens in the Gulf is that the non-Western world, Iran and other countries in the region, as well as around the world, will resolve the situation in the Gulf, not us.
And you talk about resource sovereignty here. One of the things about Iran is that they are largely self-contained, is that they have the natural resources they have access here through the northern sea route here. They have lots of farmland, et cetera, where they can grow most of their own food. They have water. They obviously have petroleum resources. So even if you blockade everything, even if somehow you cut all these land routes, which we can't, not even close to having resources to even attempt that, much less succeed, you're not going to strangle them out, because they do have a version of resource in sovereignty that others don't have. And that leads to them being able to make statements or demands, I think, like these that they're doing right now, which is basically, we're not going to open the Strait of Hormuz until you correct your behavior, which they define as you must never threaten Iran again, permanently end the war, and with its allies in the region, lift the naval blockade, withdraw forces from the region, completely compensate Iran, and release our foreign assets, which is everything from the Memorandum of Understanding, but all up front. Instead of before, there was, I think, only three main things that we had to do: drop the blockade, release sanctions, and then provide frozen funds, which we didn't do. But everything else was supposed to be negotiated. Now they're saying all the things to negotiate have to be up front, or they're not going to open the Strait of Hormuz. And the question is, with that resource sovereignty to whatever degree, is that enough for them to maintain that even with the blockade longer than we can?
Well, remember that Iran is a continental power, which means that it has support and sustainment coming into it from Russia as well as China. We're a maritime power. Whatever we do has to go 6,000 miles, largely by ship and secondarily by air. And the bases that we're operating from are no longer bases in close proximity to Iran, which means that we've got that much further to go than we normally would, whether it's to launch strikes or to conduct surveillance or anything else. I think there are a couple of other things that we should mention. There's a book called by Norman Davies, and it's a book about World War II, and it's really worth reading. And it compares what happened during the war between Germany, Russia, or the Soviet Union and ourselves. And when you look at that and you fast forward into the current environment, you understand something. Iran can withstand a lot more damage. Their standard of living is not nearly as high as ours. If it suffers, it's not going to be as acutely felt in Iran as it is going to be felt here in the United States. The other thing is that Iran is in an existential war, much like the Soviet Union and Germany were. We're not in an existential conflict. We haven't even declared war, which is not a minor consideration. Then you've got to add something else. The Houthis inside Al-Ansarah have now attacked Saudi Arabia's shipping in the Red Sea. The Saudis aren't moving anything out of Yanbu. They can turn around and destroy Yanbu if they decide to do it. And they can also reach oil infrastructure as well from southern Yemen. So I guess my point is, from a purely strategic calculus standpoint, the Iranians, in Donald Trump's words, hold all the cards, Dan. We don't hold any at this point. And in the meantime, the rest of the world, especially in the Middle East and Southwest Asia, is rearranging itself in real time. You now have this new alliance between Saudi Arabia. I don't want to say alliance, but it's clearly a security alignment between Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Pakistan. My understanding is that the Egyptians are now under a lot of pressure to join it. And I think there's a lot of evidence that they may well do that. So that means the largest, most powerful Sunni Muslim Arab states, plus the Turks, plus Pakistan, will be aligned against Israel. I mean, absolutely, unquestioningly aligned against Israel, and secondarily against us. And it's not a direct attack on us, but it's a recognition that we've demonstrated we can't protect anybody in the Gulf. And as a result, they're going to form an alliance that's designed to protect them on their own without help from us. So I think this new Turkey, Saudi, Paki, potentially Egypt defense pact is crafted to halt Greater Israel and replace us in the Gulf.
And, you know, one of those constraints, you talked about resource sovereignty. We don't seem to even have that because our resources in the military realm are running low. There was an interesting exchange on Fox News yesterday, not in the direction you might think, although some of those are coming, with Dan Hoffman, former CIA station chief that's on a lot of national security issues. And in this exchange here, he's going to use a lot of the buzzwords about how bad Iran is and they're terrible and all this stuff. But listen pretty carefully, because he's going to admit something here, that there is a major shortfall in our military resource in the absence of sovereignty because of our defense industrial base from 10 years ago.
We could draw the inference that we're pausing on military strikes, perhaps because some of our stocks have been depleted. What I would emphasize from my experience serving in the intelligence community and deployed overseas for years in war zones with the U.S. military, this is not like a water faucet that you can turn on. If we're talking about our defense industrial base, this is something we want to build out. We should have been building out 10 years ago. And so if the Trump administration is doing this now, and Deputy Secretary Steve Feinberg has taken the lead, and that's good because he's had extraordinary experience and success in the private sector, that will be good for 3-4 years down the road. We need to do this, and the Congress needs to be briefed, and they need to be supportive, I think, of what is an astronomically high defense budget, but it looks like it's something that we need to be doing.
Now, he also went on to talk about the debt that we have, and I'll talk about that separately because that affects it. But he's admitting here now that, and this is something you've always said, even on our show and in your books, that you want to, the army, the military that you want to go to war with, you had better been starting it 10 years before, because that's how long it takes to bring these things into account. He's talking about just the defense industrial base is 3 years or more away from even having an effect on what's going on now. But Doug, we just talked about, we've got 3 or 4 weeks to make some kind of a decision here, or we're going to be in a world of financial hurt.
Well, Hoffman and Feinberg are both Israeli firsters. So they're going to find an excuse to do whatever is possible to pour more money into this war against Iran. And for that matter, into any conflict that is either anti-Russian, anti-Iranian, and for the most part, anti-Muslim, anti-Islamic, let's put it that way, in the region. We have no interest in that as a country. There's no reason why we should be engaged in any of those things. So let's get that straight. Secondly, yes, he's telling us now things that we said a very long time ago. I don't know how many times I've written it, and I wrote it because I was being told these things by friends in the industry, friends in Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, GD. We have no surge capacity, none. That's something that we lost a long time ago, and no one cared. And the biggest problem we have is that the whole force posture is designed for the short war. It's designed to essentially beat down weak opponents that have little to no air and missile defense, and certainly no significant naval or Air Force capability. Those days are over. And what Iran marks is a fundamental sea change in the history of international relations. Iran is a former great power in the form of Persia. It now has the human capital as well as the scientific industrial knowledge to build enormous quantities of missiles, long, medium range, strike, tactical ballistic missiles, unmanned systems, whatever it is, within the framework of this new technology for space-based surveillance. It gives you persistent surveillance and instant targeting data. This is a revolution for which we were completely unprepared. We should have been, because you and others and I have talked about what was done under Surovikin when he established the strategic defense at the end of 2022 that had inflicted such terrible damage on the Ukrainians and made it impossible for the Ukrainians to mass any significant numbers of forces. And whenever they did, they lost them. We paid no attention to that. And we assumed from the outset that Iran was not what it is. Iran was a weak power. Iran was incapable of withstanding the might of the United States military. You know, all this sort of self-congratulatory, narcissistic crap. All of that has fallen short. We should be disengaging. We should be returning home, focused on what's important here, and studying carefully what we need to do for the future. Because right now, we're not really postured in a different way. We haven't fundamentally rethought the structure. We haven't raised any of the critical questions. You know, where do we fight? How do we fight? How do we get there? With whom? And so forth. All of those things had to be answered differently now and from now on. Feinberg's not going to do that. Hoffman certainly won't. Nobody in the administration will. They're all focused on one thing. And this is the problem when everybody says, well, why doesn't Donald Trump simply recognize the futility of continuing and end it? Well, how does he explain that to the people that put him in office? How does he explain that to the people that control the House, the Senate, and the White House?
Well, he could explain to them by saying physical constraints prohibit us from doing that without basically committing national suicide. We'll see how that's going to work out. But sticking with this part about here, okay, there's no surge capacity that exists. They tried to, and it's just incrementally moved out a little bit. But even Hoffman later in that same interview said, listen, even that's something in the next 2 to 3 years is going to be hard enough because we already have nearly $40 trillion debt hanging over us. And you just can't keep adding to that without eventually that collapsing on top of us. Or do you think he's wrong? Can we literally just forever keep adding to the national debt?
No, we can't. But what people will ask you, and this is where Nassim Taleb, he talks about the black swan, you know, these events. And what he'll tell you is that we have a swimming pool full of black swans right now. We don't know when they're all going to take off, but they're all primed and ready to fly, which means that you could have a number of different kinds of bubbles and collapses in the financial system, the banking system, the treasury markets. We've seen the beginning of this in Japan. We're watching this slow global fracturing and meltdown in the Western financial system. So everybody will say, well, when's it really going to break? When's it really going to hit? And everybody will tell you the same thing. Nobody really knows. But I think most of us, and you know, I'm talking about people that I trust, whether it's someone like Ray Dalio or Luke Roman or Jeffrey Gundlach, Alistair McLeod. I mean, we go down the list. All of these people are very bright, thoughtful analysts, and they say it's coming, and it's coming soon. I would think that President Trump is increasingly aware of that. If he wasn't, he would never have said what he did in Paris. I'm not going to end up like Herbert Hoover. I know the global economy could go into a depression. That's why we must open the strait. Well, obviously, he gets it. He understands. So we're back to the critical question, Dan. Why isn't he responding appropriately? Why is he essentially dragging us into a protracted war? Because people like Hoffman and Feinberg and others in the White House and on the Hill, they want a protracted conflict. They don't understand the consequences for us as a country, let alone the rest of the world. They're only thinking about their interests and Israel's. And their interests and Israel's demand a protracted war. But we can't do it. That's the bottom line. I wonder how long it's going to take before President Trump figures that out, because you and I know There's a lot of evidence for a lot of unhappy people in the armed forces right now who've had to live under miserable conditions at sea for months and months and months. You get at some point revolts, rebellions. And I don't know if we'll get it, but it's not impossible. I mean, nobody that's been to sea for any length of time can appreciate how bad it is right now in the Indian.
Well, you know, one has to ask the question, though. A lot of these people who say they want these open-ended conflict and they whatever for Israel's interest or whatever it is, they still are not stupid people. They may be greedy, but they're not stupid, and they should be able to see this. I mean, with Dan Hoffman's even admitting some of this stuff, because that was one of the more tame ones that he said in the last few months here, but that is not tame from coming from somebody like, well, Mike Pompeo.
The president was talking in the middle of the week about how we were very close to a deal. I think you can see we're not remotely close to that. The Iranians are not yet willing to give up because they're not business people, because they want to destroy Israel and the United States of America. And so the blockade will have to continue, not to put a pressure on the Iranian people, but to put pressure on the regime itself. And I think that's the path that President Trump has chosen to go down. One of the objectives I know President Trump is driving towards is getting energy prices back to normal, getting the strait actually opened. While I agree with the president that we're in control of who's coming in and who's coming out, it's not free commercial travel there today. It's just, you can see it by the insurers' unwillingness to insure ships that are moving through the strait. To get back to that place that we want to, I think it's going to take more than just economic pressure. I think it's going to take more continued military efforts as well. And I think the president will come to that same conclusion.
Yeah, so he's still obviously saying that going back to war. Maybe I'm giving him too much credit. Do you think he actually does believe that, yeah, we just need to go back to military and that will force the Iran open?
He believes what his donors tell him, and he will do what his donors want him to do. He's in a position very similar to President Trump. He's on the payroll. He's part of the group. This man is not going to back away from any action, regardless of how stupid it is, let alone stand up and make it clear that we as Americans have no strategic interest in this war. We're not interested in going to war with virtually everybody in the region. We're not interested in killing Muslims everywhere. We're not interested in killing anybody anywhere at this point. There's no reason why we should be. I mean, these are the kinds of people that have been telling us for years, nuclear warheads are on their way in Iran. Soon they'll be on missiles. And then New York City and Los Angeles are at risk. You know, it takes me back to the 1960s. Why didn't Lyndon Baines Johnson nuke China when we identified that they had nuclear facilities? What made China different from everyone else so that he wasn't necessarily concerned about that? And why did Richard Nixon refuse to join Brezhnev in a joint Soviet-American strike against Chinese nuclear development? I mean, why not? Because it's insane. You don't precipitate wars over nuclear weapons and with nuclear weapons. You don't do it. You know, if you do, it will lead to a larger conflagration. Now, the one thing we can say with absolute certainty is that all of the demands that Pompeo and the rest of these people have made on behalf of their mentors and sponsors and donors in the Israel lobby, if you want to call it that, they have said repeatedly all sorts of things, all of which were lies, all of which were wrong and made no sense. They're not going to back off from it right now. But none of it makes sense for us. It never did. And we don't need to be part of this. I think that's why the polls reflect what they do. I was talking to a friend the other day who's Jewish, and he said, don't you think these polls that suggest that more than 70% of the American people oppose the war indicate that anti-Semitism is on the rise? I said, well, I wouldn't be surprised if anti-Semitism isn't on the rise for a whole range of reasons right now connected with this government and our foreign and domestic policy. But I don't think that's the issue. I think the real issue is that Americans see no reason for this. They don't buy it. And when this hits them financially and economically.
Revolutionary salute to our brother Off the Cuff record, KT Off the Cuff record for the 10 jewels to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. Appreciate the love, soldiers. Salute.
Over the next several months, it's going to be hell to pay in Washington. It'll be really very interesting to see how people jump off this sinking Titanic that President Trump sadly has made himself captain of. because that's what he's on. That's why I said he's writing the book, The Art of Defeat. It's tragic. It's unnecessary. I think he knows that, but he can't get out.
Well, he might need to want to try to figure that out pretty soon. Interesting, you mentioned some of what the polls say about the American people. As it turns out, we're going to have pollster Rich Barris on the show later this afternoon at 3 p.m., and he's going to be telling us graphically exactly what the real polls say. He's one of the best there is in the industry at cutting through all the political left or right slant that so many polls get to actually tell you what people are thinking. And I think you are aware of what he's going to discuss there. I want to get back to one of the things that Pompeo said there, because it kind of related to what you just said there about how the people, you think that the really people are moving against something else because they see these things aren't necessary. That's why they're turning against this war in historic numbers to this early of a stage than we ever have, I think, even including World War II. I mean, you go all the way back and nothing has been as bad as this one is, and that is including the 2003 Iraq War, by the way. And then it's just the fact that Pompeo demonizes the other side so that they're not rational actors. They're not somebody you can make a deal with. They're theocratic thugs, and they just are hell-bent on the destruction of our country, and they want to drive us out of the region, Israel out of the region, etc. Is that starting, do you think, also to fall on deaf ears, that people say, look, the Iranians, they actually kind of sound like rational actors, and what they're saying kind of makes sense. They don't seem like these irrational people that Pompeo wants them to be held into.
Well, let's be frank. The people in Washington don't have the gift of seeing themselves through the eyes of others. In other words, we don't really bother to stop and consider what the impact of what we say and do has on people overseas. We live in isolation in this bubble. Some people like to call it Versailles on the Potomac. In any case, they're not thinking about it, and they really need to, because the American people, they're not really familiar with the details on places like Venezuela or Nigeria, Kenya, Yemen, Thailand, Vietnam. I mean, we don't have a population that frankly has any reason to know a great deal about those places. But what they have figured out, which is different from what we had in the past, is that we're expending enormous quantities of money and time, resources. We're also losing lives, and it doesn't make any sense. Remember, in Vietnam, there was this underlying consensus in the United States: communism is bad, communism is dangerous. Well, the APAC, neocon globalists have tried to equate anyone opposed to them and their agenda, whether they're an Islamic State in the Middle East or Russia or China or anyone else, as similar to the communist threat. No, Dan, I don't think it's worked. I think people don't understand that's nonsense. And by the time Vietnam ended, everybody understood, just because we packed up our gear and came home, millions of Vietnamese communists were not going to build ships and float across the Pacific to attack California. I mean, this is the sort of nonsense. You were in Iraq, and you remember, this is back in 2004, when Abizaid stood in front of the cameras and said, if we don't stop them now here, then we'll be fighting them in the United States. It's crap. It's the same nonsense. It's a big lie. That's what Americans have figured out. It's a big lie. And I don't think our major institutions really have much credibility anymore. The people on top of them don't. Somebody said every institution is always the measure of a man. And I think if you look at the Department of Defense, certainly in the decades after World War II, it was George Marshall who was the measure of defense. Well, he's long since gone. Most people don't know who he was and could care less. What have you got now? You look at the people at the top, and people are saying, who are these people? And why should we listen to them? They don't make any sense. So I think everything has changed, frankly. The longer Donald Trump persists in this, the greater the consequences for him, our economy, and our country. But again, somebody's got control of him. I think we know that it certainly isn't the FBI. I don't know who does, but they're not letting him off, and he can't just walk out. Look, he hasn't been able to divorce us from Ukraine, even though he knows and has known for some time Ukraine's a catastrophe. All we can do is feed more human lives into the Russian meat grinder. Ukraine has no chance of winning anything. And whatever damage they're supposed to do to Russia shrinks to insignificance next to the damage that's being done to Ukraine and Europe. Imagine being a German right now and recognizing it was the United States and United States power and influence that destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline. You're watching hundreds of thousands of people walk away from monumental enterprises like Volkswagen. And you're asking, what are we doing? The greatest chemical industry in the world was always in Germany. Optics. I mean, we just go down the list. Precision engineering, everything. It's all being destroyed. In the name of what? In the name of diversity? In the name of Russia is bad, we won't buy their gas? I mean, this is all insane. It's all coming together.
Yeah, and we're actually going to have Marjorie Taylor Greene on later this afternoon, actually about 1 o'clock, and she's actually going to be talking about some of that very thing there from what she observed from the inside of Trump world. So that'll be an interesting, well, certainly some questions we'll ask her. One other thing on this current topic I want to get your view on, because it's if Pompeo was kind of, I mean, it's loosely, we can say he was a diplomat. He was one in name only. But General Jack Keane wants to basically pick up the script that Pompeo is reading from and actually wants to go a little further.
I understand the economic pressure, and we talk about it in terms that we're used to dealing with. The amount of revenue they're losing every day, spiraling inflation, currency devaluation, all the things that we look at anybody's economy, and reasonable people would come to the conclusion they can't stand this. They're going to collapse eventually. They're going to eventually bend to our will. I don't think so. And the reason is this is a diabolical tyranny-based terrain that has an ideology to destroy the state of Israel and drive the United States out of the region, and they want to take control. Eventually, President Trump will combine military force and what Secretary Bessent is doing. Yes. And at that point, when we do that, we will bend Iran to our will.
Bend Iran to our will. What do you think of that, Doug? Is that coming?
I think General Keane and probably some of his retired general friends are looking at the possibility of living in villas, sitting on the former territory of Gaza, gazing out at the Mediterranean once Greater Israel is established. I really think these people are living a fantasy. And of course, I know Larry Kudlow is, but he lives in fantasy world. Remember, this is New York City. That's an extension of Israeli Zionist Jewish power. And so that's the seed of it. From his standpoint, there's no alternative but the complete and total annihilation of Iran. And that's what he's plugging for. And I think that's what General Keane wants. I go back again to the question, is it in the interest of the American people to annihilate Iran as a great power? Is that really, really something that's vital to our strategic interest? And now we talked earlier about the Turkey or the Turkish-Saudi Pakistani alliance that could eventually, and perhaps sooner than later, include Egypt as this fundamentally anti-Israeli alliance designed to protect what is in the region from the Greater Israel Project, and obviously our support. You also have the other alliance in name, not necessarily in name, but in practice, and that's Russia, Iran, and China. And they've all made it very clear that they're not going to stand around and tolerate the annihilation of the Iranian state. So how does this help us as a country to be engaged in this self-defeating enterprise? We gain nothing from it. The only thing we'll end up with is splendid isolation that isn't very splendid, because originally isolationism was only about staying out of other people's wars. We're putting ourselves in a position where that resource sovereignty is going to become absolutely vital, because large numbers of people in the world won't want to do any business with us.
Yeah, that it's hard to see how we're going to avoid that, and there's none of the trend lines are moving in that good direction here. I want to shift over to the Russia-Ukraine war, because you mentioned that a second ago, and you really can't talk about either one of these in isolation, as you have written about on your Substack. about how these are becoming one war here. And let's take a look at some of that stuff. The narrative is still very puzzling. Now, this is from the Associated Press. I think it was published yesterday. Trump told Ukraine it had no cards, and then Kiev took the war to Russia. When you get into the details of that, it says Kiev has ramped up a campaign of longer-range strikes inside of Russia and in areas Moscow has seized. Pardon me. Increased production of weapons, targeted Russian air defenses, and hit oil infrastructure and the warehouses of major retailer in a bid to ensure ordinary Russians feel the impact of the conflict. Now, much of that is per se accurate, as they certainly have done those things. They have hit those targets. But then the real question is, does that lead to a war termination or a shift in the direction of the war away from Moscow and towards Kiev, such that at some point that Moscow will go, you know what, that's enough pain. I guess we're going to have to settle on your terms. What do you say?
Well, first, I think we're looking at a 40% reduction, or we're looking at a week or two ago, in Russia's capacity to refine oil, petroleum for various products. This has not really hurt Russia very much. A lot of that damage is rapidly repaired. You know, refineries are very large, very robust structures. They're not easily destroyed. It takes a lot more effort than what the Ukrainians are able to mobilize, frankly. But having said that, has this had an impact on decision-making at the highest levels in Moscow, which I think is the real question. You know, as I talk to people that are coming back from Russia and read what's translated from the Russian media and from their television, I would say Russians are universally very angry, not at President Putin. They're angry at what's being done to them. And increasingly, they blame the West because they know the Ukrainians can't manufacture these weapons. And they're not. They're taking components that come in from the West. They're assembling them. Sometimes they modify them, sometimes they're not. And then they launch them. Unmanned and unmanned systems, similar to what the Iranians produced. And also they're launching tactical, not really tactical, but medium-range missiles. And some people are saying they're going to get long-range missiles. If they do, again, that has to come from Great Britain, France, Germany, potentially other countries. Now, that's very dangerous. Fortunately for us, we do not have a madman in the Kremlin. He is much more balanced and rational than we give him credit for being. He's not interested in a war with the West. He wants to do business with the West. He wants to get this thing over with. He wants to be sure that when the war ends, that he and the Europeans can still do business with each other. We're getting very close to radical change politically in a place like Germany and France. Let me stop for a minute and talk about this. There have been meetings outside of Germany in third countries between Russians and Social Democrats. You have to understand the Social Democratic Party is one of the oldest in Germany, dates back to the 1860s and 70s. And they are now contemplating quietly a potential alliance with the Alternative for Germany, something which everybody says is impossible and could never happen. Well, they're rethinking this because they have reached a point where in the context of future politics, they're almost irrelevant. And historically, the Social Democrats have always been far more, I don't want to say pro-Soviet at the time, but certainly more understanding towards Moscow at that point. And I think even now, privately more willing to do business with Moscow than the others. That sort of thing could change everything overnight. That could suddenly take Germany out of this entire mess. And the Germans are fed up. There's strong undercurrents for getting out of not just the European Union, but NATO. So I still think that there's a willingness in Moscow to wait for this. Macron is it's astonishing that he's still where he is. I don't know how much longer he'll be there. The point is, we've been waiting for this sort of upheaval that's coming to manifest itself. I think it's on its way. We're going to witness it. That's going to change things. And the question is, can Moscow exercise the restraint and the patience it needs to get there? That's the first. Second, they've already got concentrations of forces that they can move very rapidly to take Odessa. and also Kharkov. And I think they would want to do that before they go for Kiev. And going into Kiev is not something they necessarily want to do. It's something they would feel compelled to do, because there's no guarantee that any agreement they reach with any government in Kiev right now is going to produce anything they can rely on for the future. And they just don't want to go back to war again in 5 or 10 or 15 years.
And, Luke, there's some very practical things that are moving in that direction. You mentioned Odessa. This just shows how the air wars continue to happen. This was day before yesterday, where there was a massive attack against Odessa. And it's pretty much already shut down as an effective deep sea port there in the Black Sea. So that continues on. And then that's going on with what's happening in the capital city, where there's not even the pretense that they have any air defense. And I was talking to somebody that I know that has direct access into even the government level in Ukraine. And they say, listen, if you're seeing that in Kiev, you can imagine everywhere else, especially in the front line, they don't have any defenses on anything. Some areas, they said, got like 1 Patriot missile per day that they had, which obviously is meaningless in the terms of air defense. They said against the glide bombs that Russia has, there is no defense. And even Patriots, they don't even hit that kind of target. So they are utterly defenseless in the air, whether it's those drones, now missiles. Where is that going to leave Ukraine? Upon what basis does somebody like the Associated Press say, hey, Kiev took it to Russia and that's going to work, when at least Russia has air defense and they can knock down a majority of things that are sent in there? How does that work?
Well, I think it makes Ukraine ungovernable. It turns it into a rubble pile. It destroys whatever is left of its agriculture, whatever little industry they have. And so Ukraine becomes a dead state. I think it's already a zombie country. It's got a facade for a government. It's mired in more corruption than we can even begin to imagine. I think Europeans, particularly those that live on the border, the Poles know that, which is why the attitude in Poland has changed so radically. That's why the Polish government now says there will be no more aid in terms of Polish advice or support or military assistance. I think the Hungarians understand this, the Slovaks do. These are the countries that border Russia. Now, when you go to Lithuania, which borders Ukraine and White Russia, it's a little different. Ukraine has remained steadfastly, violently anti-Russian, goes back to the Second World War, as so much does. And we don't understand it. But the point is this. Yes, this war will end. It'll end when suddenly no one sends anything else to Ukraine, because there's no one there to accept it other than a few people with their hands out, anxious to climb on a plane and send whatever funds you gave them to banks in Cyprus or Albania or somewhere else. So that's when it's going to end, sadly. Now, in the meantime, the Russians hold the cards. They can move decisively whenever they want to move. They have to deal with the fact that we provide the same kind of, not exactly the same, but certainly substantial overhead-based intelligence and surveillance to the Ukrainians, which allows them to launch precision weapons from time to time at the Russians and do some damage. Enough to win the war? No. Enough to be more than an irritant? Sometimes. But right now, it looks like the Russians have pretty good defenses all up and down the front. And they're moving forward as a consequence. The problem for the Russians, as you point out, is behind the front. It's Russia itself. That's 1,000, 1,100 mile front that you're trying to defend. And they have a lot more in terms of air and missile defense than we do. But it's still very difficult to do that. And that's why a lot of these things get through.
Now, there's an additional development here. This is according to the Ukraine press, the Kiev Post, is it's not just that Ukraine now no longer has defensive missiles to knock anything down from ballistic missiles and hypersonics from Russia, but now Russia is apparently increasing its offensive capacity at the same time. So Russia could soon launch 200 ballistic missiles in a single attack instead of the 70 or so that they've been doing here of late, because their capacity is growing. It's not even that it's more, but it's continuing to escalate. What does that tell you about the course of this war? Maybe what it might look like in Ukraine over the rest of this year?
The Russians could actually concentrate more firepower than that. The reason they haven't is that they are holding much in reserve, because there is still this belief in Russia, even in Moscow, that conceivably Europeans could try to intervene in Western Ukraine. That you could see NATO forces from the Baltic states or Poland or Slovakia or Romania, more likely, move into Western Ukraine. So they're holding a lot of troops in reserve. You know, they've increased the size of their forces dramatically. They're over 1 million. And they've got the equipment, and a lot of people are training right now that as a result of a recent call-up. They can concentrate more, but they're still holding this in reserve. And again, this all goes back to Donald Trump. If Donald Trump, as the leader of NATO, believed in anything he said, this war would have ended a long time ago. But it turns out he doesn't. He's turned out to be the toothless monster, if you will. Instead of being the great gargantuan beast that everyone in Europe thought he was, he's some version of the Cookie Monster. Nothing's changed. He's not really in charge, because the same people that were there under Biden and who were there before Biden, in fact, under Obama, not as many, but almost, and going back to the Bush administration, the same kinds of people have risen to the top and are controlling things now. And they want the war with Russia to continue, and they want the war against Iran and anybody else in the Middle East that opposes Israeli expansion to continue. So that's the tragedy.
Dan, you got to bring yourself in, Dan.
Was out. Sorry about that. Did not realize I was out. I want to spend the last few minutes we have here on something the kind of domestic. I know that's something you pay a lot of attention to, and that is the education of our armed forces. This piece in the American Conservative by Kelly Vlahos, a mutual friend of ours. Do Hegseth reforms to military universities go far enough? Hegseth came in and he was apparently, really excited about going after wokeness and a bunch of stuff like that. But is it far enough, and is that even the right thing to focus on? What do you think?
Well, it's something that deserves a focus, but there has to be a larger strategic framework. And that doesn't exist right now. It's kind of interesting. I thought it was wonderful that she used the expression of military universities, because I and many of my peers who are familiar with the United States Military Academy at West Point have long since stopped calling it a military academy. It isn't. It's a university where boys and girls wear uniforms and go to classes together. That's about it. The original mission of the military academy was to provide officers for the regular army. The new mission statement talks about leaders for America and all this kind of nonsense. I think all of the military academies have become these kinds of universities. And the question is, do we need them? I'm not interested in funding people's 4-year educations at quote unquote military universities. I want to get back to what are we trying to get out of it? What's the goal? What are we extracting? So that's part of it. The other part is at higher levels. What are we doing to impart really useful knowledge? Science, technology, military operations, operational art, all of these things. Well, the problem is we don't hold anyone accountable, Dan. If you show up, you graduate. Now, there are always some people that don't, 1 or 2 individuals, usually for reasons that don't have much to do with performance. Sometimes they do, but let us say out of 285 that matriculate at the National Defense University, 285 routinely graduate. Who are we kidding? Is this really a course of instruction? Is something really being learned? The other thing is we have a lot of single service war colleges. Well, I don't think single service warfare is viable anymore. And I think the biggest problem we have is that there's not enough emphasis and understanding of what real integrative operations need to look like in the future. We're still living in the 1947 National Security Act that enshrined really the way the services fought World War II, or at least how they thought it was fought. That's why Eisenhower opposed it. There were a lot of people that didn't like it because it made matters worse. It didn't improve the situation. The bureaucracies at the service level took over, and the rest is history. Congress doesn't care. All they're interested in is where does the money go, and do I benefit from it? Do my constituents, do my donors? So they don't give a damn. I listened to a senator just excoriate Pete Hegseth. Now, you can say what you want about Pete Hegseth. You know, anybody who's Secretary of Defense is going to be under fire from time to time. He's obviously said some things that are probably unfortunate, but that he's not responsible for everything you're seeing right now. He didn't walk into that institution and somebody didn't walk up and hand him, sir, here's your guidebook. And you need to look at the levels of readiness in the armed forces, in all of the services. You need to look at the combat forces, the mission-focused capability packages. You need to look at the various modernization programs, and you need to look at what we have in our arsenal, what we have sitting on the ground, Air Force, Navy, Army, Marines, and understand what we're really postured to do, what kind of war we can or cannot fight, and the impact of the last 30 years. Okay. Nobody did that. Nobody did it. Nobody does that. And in most cases, what does the Secretary of Defense do? What does the Secretary of Service do? He shows up, Dan, and he presides. They give him a funny little hat that says SecNav and put little stars on it, or a funny little hat that says boss and SecDef or some other crap. So no one has been asked to look at anything. All they're asked for is a budget with money. And then he comes across and says, well, you know, the wars cost a lot of money. Well, it's your fault because you lost the war. Okay. Well, he has had a role in it. Nobody's going to refute that. But who are you kidding, Senator? What have you done? Have you led any charges lately against illegal wars? Have you raised any constitutional questions?
Great point.
What do you know about the armed forces? What do you know about who commands it, how they get there? You don't know. You don't know anything about these so-called universities and how useless they are. Who the hell are we kidding? This is not professional. I can take you to some surprising places. I could take you to Poland and show you a real General Staff Academy. And I could show you real General Staff students. And you would understand that 10% of the students are probably going to fail. They won't pass the course and become General Staff officers. They will be returned to duty without prejudice. You're not a General Staff officer. You're a very good line officer, and you're still in line for future promotion, but you're not a General Staff officer. You don't get that designation. So after 2 years, we're sorry, farewell, goodbye, good luck. We don't have a system like that. And the reason we don't have it is because the people in it don't want it. I mean, I sat next to people at the Leavenworth Staff College, and they were nice people, but I would say at least half of the group that I was with had no business being there. These people were struggling with how to write an operations order. I mean, are you kidding? You know, that's insane. And they said, well, you know all about this stuff. You need to come and help us. And, you know, the staff group leaders said, you need to get in there and help. You know, what is this? Special Olympics in the military? This is outrageous. This is nonsense. But this has been going on for years. And a lot of these guys go on to be generals. Because how do you get there? Well, you get there by never rocking the boat. We know that. And so when it comes to picking people, what do you pick? You pick people not on the basis of what they've done that's especially impressive or outstanding. You pick them on the basis of what they haven't done. Haven't you ever heard the expression? I know I've heard this in many services. Well, he's commanded successfully at every level. And we all sat there and laughed. And what, peacetime? Right. Who the hell are we kidding? You know, it's a joke. All of this has got to be addressed. This administration can't do it. And
Mr. Doug, I'll ask the obvious question. who's qualified to ask those questions, or to, other than you, and obviously you've already written a whole slew of books on this stuff, and anyone who wants to can read it. That's the outlet pick you. Is there, better question, is there anybody that has the ability or the knowledge to even address the questions?
Yes, there are, both civilian and military. There definitely are. But you have to set out to identify those people. Then you bring them together. You protect them from all the slings and arrows that will be hurled at them from the outside. You sequester them and give them the time and the support to put together the alternatives. In other words, to find the right solutions, to set up ultimately a new structure and a new system. That's what the British did in 1905 until about 1912 under a new Secretary of War after the Boer War. Because even though they won the Boer War, they had to commit 250,000 British troops to take on and fight at any one time no more than about 35,000 Boers. And they performed badly. All right. They won because they had the resources, they had the numbers, and they were ultimately able to open concentration camps and put Boer women and children and old men in them, where 70,000+ of them died of starvation and disease. That's how they won the Boer War. Now, my point is, he knew that. A man, his name was Richard Haldane, very brilliant man, and a lawyer, by the way, with no military experience. But he knew this had to change. And there were a number of people in uniform that also recognized it. And so they did a pretty good job. And that army that came out of that ends up fighting very well in 1914. The problem was it was an army designed for everything but war on the European continent against the Germans. So they all died. But they fought well, and then they were replaced by, millions of citizen soldiers who did the best they could, but they ended up like our citizen soldiers during World War I, but more important, during the Civil War. So, Grant was asked by, and I'll shut up after this. Grant was asked by a journalist what unit was he most proud of having served with in his career. This is long after he retired. And he answered, Zachary Taylor's army in the Mexican War. And this man was shocked. And he went on to talk about the fact, well, Zachary Taylor's army was a professional force. Most of the soldiers we had were professionals. We were augmented, but the core army was a professional force, and they were brilliant. We could outperform, we could outmaneuver the Mexicans, even though they always outnumbered us 3 or 4 to 1. And then he said, well, you have to understand, well, what about the Civil War? He said, we have to understand those were citizen soldiers. They were brave and courageous and good men, but it's not the same as a professional force. And what happened during the Civil War? How many men did we lose in frontal attacks in the last year plus of the war in order to bring the war to a close? And people used to call Grant the Butcher. And of course, what he knew is that what else can we do? I only have so many trained professionals. I can only do so much. Now, my point is, we don't want that for the future, but we need to think very carefully about what that future should look like. And I think what Secretary Hegseth has suggested, there's nothing wrong with it. The problem is, how do you go about it? And remember, none of these institutions, nor the people in charge of them, can reform themselves.
All right. That's a fact. And I don't know how we're going to get somebody in there that's qualified. I'm glad to know there are other folks, but we're going to have to do something to start getting them elevated. And that requires somebody at the top willing to do it. And so far, we don't have that. So we're just going to have to hope that shows up.
Not just the guy at the top. Unfortunately, you have to get Congress on board. And these are people with no interest or understanding.
So it's always good. I try my best. Well, it's a pleasure to speak to you again. I'm actually excited to see what your analysis of the situation will be today. There's been a lot of developments in the last few weeks, or the last week since we last spoke. But I'll keep the first question open-ended. What's your analysis of the current state of affairs?
We're on a collision course. I think most people now recognize that. There have been all kinds of hopes that we wouldn't be on a collision course. Every time there's a little bit of light, we want to overread that light. But what we are seeing is that in the last week, Iran has escalated demands. We all knew that was going to happen, but the extent of the escalation is catching many people by surprise. I haven't watched all your shows, Mario, but you basically covered that infinitely in the last 7 days. You're trying to understand that and so forth. But it's also then yesterday with Trump. So we know Trump threatened infrastructure bombing, tacoed out, and then, there's light at the end of the tunnel. He's back. And then yesterday, now he's issuing unilateral demands and so forth. So I think what we are seeing is we're seeing the ebb and flow of the spiral phase of the escalation trap. In that spiral phase, there are surprise pauses, surprise advances, surprise attacks. That is normal here. It's not simply linear, but we are fundamentally on a collision course. And what I want to do today, Mario, and I let your producers know, is I want to give an explanation why. So for the last week, people have been trying to come to grips with what's the status? Where are we at? And I realize there are people who are still going to disagree, but I think there's been a narrowing of the views as I've observed them over time. And that narrowing of the views is coming to the idea that this war is going to go on for a while. Hormuz is not going to open for a while. Remember, last time I presented some slides about why the United States could not physically open Hormuz. And so there's some consensus that's emerging here that we're in deep trouble, essentially. But I think the reason why and what's happening more analytically is not there, at least not as fully as it possibly could be. And I think in about 5 or 7 minutes, I want to present some slides that I think would be good to get out into the open, into the discourse, so that people can think about these.
You're welcome to show the slides.
Oh, great. Okay.
Excited
I want to show just 3 slides, Mario. First slide I want to show is Iran's expanding demands over time. And I've just published a big post on my Escalation Trap Substack for people that want to go deep dive into this stuff. But the first thing to understand here is that Iran's demands have been expanding, and not day by day, but period by period since the war began. And our expectations of Iran's demands are only now catching up to the change, because many people were still in phase 1 before last week. So if we look at this chart, what you can see is in March through May, I would call this the period of war transitioning to the ceasefire. And what you can see, and I've just laid out some of the key issues here, is that essentially this is the period where Iran mostly wants peace, mostly wants a ceasefire, has a little bit of edginess to their demands for money and reparations, but not a whole lot. Then it transitions to the MOU. Now, once we get into the MOU, now we're in actual bargaining phase. This is where there's negotiation between the United States and Iran on a series of these issues, and also negotiations with Iran and Oman. And Iran wants a little bit more upfront cash in this particular period. Now we've transitioned, and I put the date as July 7th because that's when the Everlovely was attacked. You could have put it a little bit later as well, maybe the 12th, but that wouldn't change the fundamental analysis here. This is the period of unilateral demands. This is the period that we're in now, and I think we're going to be in for quite some time, where the demands have escalated, and they've escalated across the board. And notice, as the demands have escalated across the board, the whole nuclear issue is just fallen off the radar. It's not even here anymore. You see what I mean? So we've clearly seen this 3 periods of Iran's demands. Now, the next question is why? And why do we see this over time in this way? So I'm gonna, and this is where it gets a little tricky because I have to change the slide. So hopefully that's gonna work. And so I think that has just changed the slide, and it has. This can be explained fairly directly by the declining oil inventories and other buffers. China, we can get all this put together. I'm just showing the core issue with the daily strategic petroleum reserve releases for the world. This is basically the chart of the 32 countries that agreed in the middle of March to release that 400 million barrels over 120 days. And they're still releasing, by the way. So just because 120 days but notice the clear trajectory here, Mario. It's clear trajectory, and it's going to keep going down as the days, the weeks go on, because we're going to run out of the cushions. And you have covered, and many people have covered this basic fact. I'm trying to get people to focus on the dates. Notice that as this goes down, Iran's leverage has been going up, and its demands have been going up. So this isn't just about personalities of Trump. This isn't just about the split between hawks and doves inside of Iran. Here, there's something much more fundamental occurring, Mario, which is as the oil inventory cushions are running down here. And again, this is just one of the pieces. There's also the Red Sea. There's also China's imports. All paint a very similar picture here. But as they are running down, Iran's leverage is growing. And as its leverage is growing, its demands are growing. And that's the key point I want to drive home. All these other issues are secondary. It's not that you don't matter at all. It's that they're secondary to the fundamental structure of power. Now, what are the current demands, and why do those current demands make sense from a balance of power perspective, not just, overreach by Iran? Because there's a big question, is Iran overreaching or not? But let's give some actual analysis of this, as opposed to coming at this less systematically. So let me just show you the third slide, which I think really helps to put a lot of their current demands in perspective. Now, the big thing that happened in the spring, Mario, even before the MOU, is the West came up with a set of ideas, and basically at corporate boardrooms, to bypass Hormuz. And I know, because I've been in discussions with a lot of people from this corporate world in April, in early May, say, no, not a problem here with Hormuz. We're just going to bypass it over 2 years.
Professor, can you expand the screen? This is a really interesting slide. There's a lot of writing on it. I think this one's worth expanding.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, just give me a sec. Let's see if I can. You folks are a lot more technically adept than I am. So let's see if that worked here. Can you see if the screen expanded, or did I have to change the presentation?
You have to share it again. No, you have to share it again.
Let's see if that'll work. So let's give it a shot. And then let's see if that...
Because what you're showing here is the alternative to the Strait of Hormuz, which is there it is, perfect.
Yes, and I'm also trying to explain, Mario, that the knowledge of whether Hormuz was going to be bypassed only got into the public's mind maybe in the summer, people closely watching. all of this was being discussed in March and April and in early May in corporate boardrooms. And basically, Scott Bessent now, just in the last few days, has revealed the plan, which is in 2 years, Hormuz isn't going to matter anymore. And the reason it isn't going to matter is because the Middle East is going to be riddled with pipelines. There's already some there now, riddled with pipelines to get energy, other resources out of the Middle East through waterways that don't connect to the Gulf, Persian Gulf at all. Now, in that situation, Iran then developed, and this became public at the end of May for Iran with the IRGC, its resistance security belt. That's when the IRGC generals, the top leaders, started to explain that Iran didn't want just peace. It wanted the security resistance belt. And what was that? That was control and influence militarily from the Mediterranean, that is where Suez Canal is, to the Red Sea, that's where the Bab el-Mandeb is, through the Gulf. And why would you want that, Mario? You want that because if you don't control the region in this way, your whole power base is going to disappear. It's basically got an expiration date. You know how we go to the store and you buy something on the shelf and it expires in a certain period of time? Well, that's what we have been planning to do to Iran. And we have discussed all this, but basically all this, the cat all got out of the bag, because you can't start talking about building all these pipelines and have this not become knowledge. And now the public is very familiar with it. And that's why Scott Bessent is publicly saying, don't worry about us conceding on Iran. We're basically going to put Iran and the Strait of Hormuz out of business in 2 years. Well, what that has done, Mario, is it has defined the goalposts for Iran's demands. And this isn't a negotiation, okay? Iran's not negotiating to get economic relief. So a lot of people have thought what Iran wants is economic relief. This is just, I think it would like that, but that's a secondary issue, because if it gets relief today, that can be taken away in 2 years. We're just going to put Hormuz out of business. Then we're going to be able to go back as business as usual, pounding Iran's leaders. We're going to be able to attack Iran whenever we want to. We'll be able to come in and do more damage to Iran. So this idea of getting economic relief here, this is temporary at best. What power is what dictates what Iran's security and future is going to look like, not promises by the United States or promises by the United States and Israel. So what you are seeing here is also in the last, since essentially July 7th, where have the attacks been? This isn't just a notional concept of a resistance security belt the way it was at the end of May. They're enforcing it. They're doing it. In other words, Iran has moved from survival in period 1 to ambition during the MOU to hard power in period 3, the current situation. This is not a situation, hard power, where they're looking to negotiate here. They're looking to establish their security resistance belts. And what this also tells us, Mario, what would Trump have to give Iran to open Hormuz? So what would this take? Given what I've just laid out, what would be the actual concessions that Trump would have to make so Iran would voluntarily open Hormuz? Well, number one, you see them in the list of demands from the Supreme National Security Council. Number one, the United States has to pull out all of its forces, so the United States cannot stop Iran's military control of the security resistance belt. Number two, the United States would have to give Iran money. In other words, fund Iran's expansion and rising hegemony. These key conditions are just, no president is going to be able to fund Iran's hegemony. Think about that. And by the way, there's also no discussion here at all about Iran's nuclear program. So notice that we're about to end the 60-day period of the MOU in just about 6 days on the 17th of August. And I've said for some time that they're still sort of paying attention to that. I think the idea that there's any negotiation or constraint on Iran's nuclear program, because see, in the MOU, they say they will keep the status quo on the nuclear program through the MOU negotiating period. Well, there's been no extension of that. The MOU, this is not, so what that means is there's literally not going to be any constraint whatsoever, no matter how nominal, on Iran's nuclear programs in about 6 days. And I think this is why we're on a collision course. This isn't just a minor set of issues. We're not negotiating on the edges of how to end a war nobody wants. This is these are the details of what I've described for some time as Iran would play hardball as its period of maximum leverage came into being in the middle of July, and it's right on schedule. And it would be all about the balance of power in the region. So I hope that helped, Mario. I hope it helps some people to see the actual balance of power logic underneath what Iran's demands have been and why we are on a collision course.
I am not that it matters whether I agree or not because you're the expert.
Oh, it matters hugely. Don't say that, Mario. Everybody knows it matters.
I relate a lot. I relate the most to what you've just explained now, because the first time I echoed this concern, Professor, was when Trump was before Trump announced the ceasefire, when it seemed obvious he's talking about a deal and he canceled the attack to wipe out a civilization. I put out a post that got a lot of hate. I said, Trump is looking for an off-ramp. My worry now, so if Iran does not offer him that off-ramp, Iran would move from the victim to the aggressor. Now, obviously, it's an oversimplification of something. But what I meant by this post months ago is that my worry is that the Iranians have won this war to such an extent. I didn't know the extent. Now we know the extent is a lot more than I thought back then. But back then, I thought it was to such an extent that they will have very, I wouldn't say maximalist demands, but demands that are very difficult for Trump to accept, forcing the US back into the war. I underestimated by how much Iran won the war. And I also underestimated how maximalist their demands are, which you've hinted at. 5 to 7% fee control. They're passing a law where they will choose which ships can go through, and countries have to pay reparations, and any country fighting the axis of resistance cannot go through the Strait of Hormuz. I'm like, wow. Trump is desperate to get the hell out of the region. This was a catastrophic mistake. But my worry is that it will be impossible for him to do so. So my question for you, Professor, first, am I aligned? Am I understanding it correctly? And number two, how would that play out? What happens next in that based on that concept?
Your understanding, Mario, and I don't think you, of course, meant it to be in line with the person I'm about to say. I think tracks almost identically with J.D. Vance. So and again, I've not spoken with J.D. Vance, so I can't tell you for sure, but I've watched all the information. You probably have too, and you've seen all the interviews. And he aligns very closely to your views. And recall that in the first set of negotiations in early April, who was there negotiating with the Iran negotiators? It was J.D. Vance. And I think he likely walked into those negotiations, those face-to-face negotiations, thinking a lot along the same lines you are, which is that Iran's just looking for some peace, a ceasefire, seal this off. Maybe we can then talk seriously about the nuclear program. And when he started to get a hint that there was more involved, and again, I think it was actually modestly more at that point. I think it grew over time. Notice what happened on, I think it was April 12th, if I've got my dates right. That's when President Trump said, oh, forget this negotiation or cutting a deal or the off-ramp. We're imposing the U.S. naval blockade. So recall, that's where we had a chance at an off-ramp. We didn't take it because we thought we had more power than we really did. And that has been going on period after period, Mario. And this is why you can't bring the war to an end. The wars won't end until the key combatants agree on the balance of power. So even if it's only off a little bit, even if there's only, and I think in around April 8th, this difference may have been relatively modest. Let's just put a number. Say they disagreed on the balance of power by 25%, something modest like that. That was enough to nix the off-ramp. And what did Trump do? He tried to put more pressure on them because he thought they were going to fold. He thought he was going to break them here. And what you ended up seeing is that fueled the nationalism that you and I have talked much about over the preceding months that you had with the naval blockade. That now widened the damage on the entire population of Iran, making the damage in March and early April not just narrowly to a narrow part of Iran, but basically the entire country. Here and in that situation, that is what fuels the wider nationalism, where you get tens of millions showing up at the Supreme Leader's funeral, calling for the death of Donald Trump, et cetera, et cetera. So what you are seeing is, I think you are exactly right to put your finger on where you were at, Mario. And I don't think, and again, I almost only talk to super smart people. Okay. So I am rarely disagreeing here, except with very smart people. I talk to people, West Wings, Congress, senators, representatives, smart students at the University of Chicago, smart folks like you here. And so what I am used to, what I call them is a smart person's mistake. This is not a dumb person's mistake. These are situations where it's understandable how you and J.D. Vance came to that view, except that doesn't make it right. Just because it's understandable doesn't mean it's going to be right. And that's why understanding the balance of power framework as opposed to a monetary framework, like a deal framework, is so important in international politics.
And also depends a lot on Iran's position, because it was really difficult and America's position, because if Iran is in a much weaker position, the US had more strategic petroleum reserves, or more ships were going through the Strait of Hormuz, who had more interceptors, then the US strategy would have worked. But unfortunately for the US was in a much weaker position, and Iran was in a much stronger position.
Let's give a couple counterfactuals, because I think you're 100% right, Mario. Assume we had China's petroleum reserve, massive. Okay, years we could ride this out. Assume we didn't have that, but we were up at the 730, the petroleum reserve actually tops out around a little over 700 million barrels. And Biden ran it down. And so we've been running it down for political purposes to buy off constituencies in the United States, essentially. But let's assume we had not done that and we had kept it up at max capacity. Well, we wouldn't be at, 3 years or 4 years, but you'd be at probably 2 years. So you would be able to ride this out in a much better way, which was the whole point of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve from the 70s. This was not meant to be a politician's piggy bank to just pay off the constituencies to get elected domestically. The whole point was, what if the world or some groups of oil countries in the world cut us off again? We should have many years of supply so that we can ride it out better than they can. Well, we shot ourselves in the foot here by essentially playing politics, domestic politics, with the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And then we scratch our head, oh, gee, why is Iran gaining power on us? We've planted those seeds ourselves, and you can't just turn that around on a dime. You can't fix that. This is why we really need to understand the balance of power issues, and that's how that's why Iran is gaining leverage. And its leverage will not disappear between now and the midterms. And you and I've explained this before. This is why I've been confident in saying its leverage is going to grow through the midterms. And by the way, in September and October, there'll be a little bit of relief because, the temperatures moderate in much of the world here who consumes oil here. But then it shoots right back up starting November 1st. So between now and January, Iran is in the catbird seat here. And they're driving it home. And this isn't about tough bargaining. I don't think they're looking for an MOU here. They're looking for American troops out. No signing on the dotted line. They're not looking for any signature here. This idea they're going for MOU 2.0, this is not right. What they want is those troops going back to California. They want them back to the East Coast. They want them back to the United States. And I think they don't care if anybody signs a piece of paper or not.
Agree, because they can.
Yes.
And they don't trust the U.S.
Yes. Thucydides was right. The strong do what they can. This has been one of the ultimate realist quote for so long. It's just the simple one-liner.
It's doing to the U.S. what the U.S. has done to most of the world over the last few decades, in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why there's no regret. There's no oh gee, we're sorry we're hurting Americans here. No, I don't see any signs of that. Oh. If anything, what you see, and you bring folks on all the time, but not just you, it's it's all over in the media, it's all over social media, it's all over Fars News Agency. What you see is calls for Iran to punish Americans even more. So it's more the other way around. So we keep saying it's the IRGC, which is which is being so tough. Well, actually, there seems to be an even tougher group in Iran that wants even more punishment, and they're saying, why aren't you even hurting Americans, initiating the harm to America?
So, with the Iranian demands where they are right now, they're impossible for the U.S. to accept. So you're saying the U.S. is going to rearm, restock, and then try again to militarily achieve their objectives?
I'm saying that President Trump is in the spiral phase of the escalation trap. I think it's more likely than not that he will escalate, but it's not certain. But here is his choice. His choice is not an MOU. There's no third choice here. Either he accepts Iran's position as the rising hegemonic power with all of that means, and I'm showing you all of what that means, including nuclear weapons. He's going to have to accept that.
Iran having nuclear weapons.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, he can't stop that. What could it's up to Iran. Now, I'm not telling you Iran will surely develop nuclear weapons, Mario. But there's no power by the United States to compel Iran not to go nuclear, except one power: ground forces. Go get it. You've got, and Netanyahu was quite right on 60 Minutes at the end of May. There's only one way you're going to get that enriched material out. Someone's going to have to physically haul it out. And if Iran's not going to accept that and concede to that, then you got to go in and physically do it. So what I'm telling you, Mario, is we have no leverage over Iran here. Iran will decide has the full capability now to develop nuclear weapons. It's only a matter of, is it over a few months? Is it over 6 weeks? We can debate the exact parameters of its capability limit, but its capability limit is trivial. It is, the real issue is its political will. Will it decide to build nuclear weapons? And what's happened as a result of this war is we have fully persuaded Iran that air power and naval power can't do anything to really hurt its development of nuclear weapons. Not really. We can claim it does. We can brag about what happened and that we obliterated something when we bombed Fordow. But the truth is we didn't obliterate the core capability that truly matters. And so that means that this is a real capability. And by the way, you're seeing now, I've been arguing this for months and months, and now you're seeing the more mainstream think tanks in Washington, say this and say from the Carnegie, in quoted in the New York Times. So you're getting now kind of what I would call the mainstream think tank crowd in Washington to say essentially the same thing, which is, and by the way, it's a similar date. I said in about a year, this is what I said in April when I published that piece in the New York Times on Iran's rise as the fourth center of world power. It'd be about a year or two before Iran would have nuclear weapons. And now people are saying, yeah, it's going to be about a year here. And so we can get into the details of this, Mario, but there's a lot here for Trump to swallow. And if he doesn't swallow it, there's only one way he's going to be able to stop it. He's going to have to escalate the use of force. And that might not even stop it. I'm not telling you he's got a surefire military strategy. In fact, the opposite. I think Iran is on its way to becoming the fourth center of world power, with or without war by the United States. And I think it's going to be extremely difficult to knock Iran off of that trajectory. This war should never have been started, Mario.
Oh man, yeah, Trump
saying that, but this is why for 20 years this was the big one. I modeled a lot of other conflicts, Gaza, Ukraine. This was always the big one, Mario, because Iran was the toughest rival for America since Germany in World War II.
Every president knew you do not attack Iran. You could conduct asymmetric warfare. You can attack their axis of resistance. You could conduct economic warfare, but you don't get into a full-blown war with Iran. Otherwise, the Gulf will blow up. Otherwise, the global economy would take a hit. Otherwise, the Strait of Hormuz will be closed. That was common knowledge for decades, not even years. Yet here we are.
Who does the world blame for Iran's rising power? America. So Iran played its hand very well here by biding its time, and it only seized Hormuz in response to a massive, massive American aggression. And actually, it was two aggressions. It was both the bombing of Fordow, and then later the attacks on the Supreme Leader and the and that air campaign. So when you saw those double aggressions here, this then made it politically to Iran's advantage, because it could then seize Hormuz, gain power we could not reverse. And who would get blamed? America would get blamed. And that's one of the most difficult things that the White House, the Trump White House, has really not come to grips with. Secretary Rubio he can go and complain about this, but we're doing nothing to offset and recognize that the world is blaming America for what's happened. And the way things are going, this will probably be true through January as well. I don't see many off-ramps here to starting to seriously blame Iran here, because Iran keeps saying all we want are the reparations. Iran is playing not just the hegemonic power card, but it is actually the victim. It's truly the victim. Exactly. It doesn't have to make it up.
Is it possible that we're seeing all these demands by Iran? Because I know throughout this war, what Iran says is what they mean. They've been very clear. We want this, and they stick by their demands. But is it possible the strategy shifted a bit, where their demands have increased publicly, but behind the scenes, they may agree on more concessions? They may agree on something that would allow Trump an off-ramp. And if you ask why, It's because also Iran is going through a very tough time. Their economy is in shambles. Their currency collapsed by about 50%. Trump posted about it yesterday.
This was a hope in April, Mario, that they wanted economic relief. And what did America do when there was a chance for an off-ramp on that ceasefire, April 8th? 4 days later, they had one little meeting with J.D. Vance, and then on April 12th, they imposed the blockade. So the whole problem with the idea that of giving Iran economic relief is America can just take it right back. And we've done that again and again. So this is not a case where hypothetically America could take it back. This has happened again and again. And that's why when Arachi was at the Supreme Leader's funeral, there are people calling for Arachi's death. Iranians calling for Arachi's death. It's because of this issue. There is America. It's not even just an issue of trust. What would enforce the deal if America welches on the deal? Who's going to enforce that except Iran? Only Iran, and that means Iran has to have the power to enforce it. There's no court. Who's gonna actually force America to stick by whatever deal it signed? When Donald Trump ripped up the JCPOA, Europeans didn't do anything. They just squawked. They put out a few tweets and said, "Oh, that's bad America." Where was the actual defense of Iran here? Didn't exist.
There's a lot of people worried about how this war could merge into a bigger global conflict. Obviously, pointing to Ukraine, we saw the Ukrainians fired the Iranian ship. The Iranians were, according to reports, about to retaliate. Some rumors or theories that the Ukrainians are, as well as some neocons in the US, are intentionally trying to merge these two conflicts. And obviously, there's a lot of discussions of what could happen at the South China Sea and China. Is that a worry that you have, that this could expand, this could escalate into an escalation trap that leads into a global conflict? Because there's always the example, World War I was never meant to be World War I.
So Mario, I just did a huge post on the Professor Pape Substack last week on this very issue. With a couple minutes left, we can't really address it. So I don't want to just do if people want to go check Professor Pape out, I'm explaining what's the difference between World War II and today. What would it take to make this World War II, that kind of thing. And if you want to talk about that next time, I'm glad to do it. But what I'd like to do, Mario, and again, I'm sorry if I'm not being as cooperative as I should be, but notice I really want to try to give fuller answers to these issues. And that's what I am experiencing on social media. I'm experiencing that what people are coming to me for are thicker, answers. They may not agree with me, but they see more of the reasons underneath it. And then if they disagree, they can change the reasons and they come to a different view. And so that's what I'd like to do. And believe me, I'm all, I have lots and lots of thoughts that are, at the quick thought level. But I think really I see people so hungry for substance, Mario. It's incredible. I mean, my emails, my goodness gracious. They explode. I can't even, read 1% of the emails. And they're asking substantive questions over and over again.
Go figure. Follow me.